Hello and welcome. Tonight, we'll drift back into a world almost impossible to imagine, in ancient Earth, long before us, when the first flowers began to bloom. It was a quiet transformation, a gentle unfolding that would change the face of the planet forever. Among towering dinosaurs and restless seas, fragile petals appeared, bringing color, scent, and sweetness into an age once ruled by ferns and conifers. This is the story of how beauty reshaped survival, how blossoms altered the rhythm of life itself, and how their legacy still surrounds us in every garden and every breath we take. If you find comfort and wonder in these calm journeys through time, we invite you to be part of them. Subscribe to Beyond Our Dawn, so together we can keep exploring the hidden stories of Earth, one quiet revelation at a time. In the hush of an evening that feels like it could stretch forever, we turn back the clock, not by minutes or hours, but by hundreds of millions of years, to a time before the familiar touch of petals or the perfume of blossoms. The Earth was already old then, carrying scars of vanished worlds. Continents colliding and breaking apart, seas spilling over lowlands, and creatures that looked half familiar, half strange, roaming across fern-filled valleys. This was the Cretaceous world in its early unfolding, and if you could step into that age with your modern senses, what you would notice first is not color or fragrance, but the absence of them. There were forests, yes, and plains rolling into the horizon, but their palette was steady and muted. Greens and browns repeating in long patterns, broken by cones and needles and sturdy silence. The silence would be filled with insect hum and reptilian calls, but never the soft buzz of bees moving from flower to flower, because flowers, in any recognizable sense, did not yet exist. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a riverbank, water moving slow and silty, carrying with it the sediments of a restless continent. The air feels heavier than today's, slightly warmer, with a kind of damp breath that makes the skin glisten. Around you rise the tall outlines of conifers, their branches hung with hard cones, and at your feet stretch carpets of ferns, leaves spreading like fans in the shade. These were the dominant plants of the age, ancient lineages that had seen cataclysms come and go, their resilience etched into every thick frond and resin-scented cone. The world seemed steady, eternal in its patterns. Yet something quiet and revolutionary was beginning to stir, a change that would eventually alter the face of Earth as profoundly as any asteroid impact or volcanic flood. If you close your eyes and listen, you might hear it not in sound but in rhythm, the slow preparation of seeds hidden within protective cases, the subtle reorganization of plant structures, the microscopic reshaping of pollen grains. Evolution works in whispers, not shouts, and here it was whispering of a form that would bend the course of life toward beauty and complexity. Flowers. They did not appear with fanfare. There was no single meadow that suddenly erupted in blossoms like a fireworks display. Instead, over countless generations, plants began to experiment with new strategies of reproduction. Instead of relying solely on wind to scatter pollen at random, some plants were beginning to shape themselves into lures, invitations to insects, to birds, to whatever creatures might carry their genetic story further and with more certainty to us in our modern gardens. And fields, flowers are commonplace. They are background, decoration, symbols exchanged on holidays, table centerpieces at dinner, or simply the quiet company of daisies along a suburban sidewalk. But to imagine the world without them is to realize how deeply they influence not only our senses but the structure of entire ecosystems. Without flowers there are no fruits, no apples or peaches, no grains in their modern form, no meadows of wildflowers where pollinators trace endless loops in the summer air. The dawn of flowers was the dawn of a new rhythm of life, and in the Cretaceous this dawn was still only a faint light on the horizon. You can picture an ancient plain as dusk settles, shadows of dinosaurs moving slowly through the tall trees. Their footsteps are heavy, pressing into damp soil, leaving prints that may one day harden into fossils. Dragonflies skim low over pools, wings flashing metallic in the fading sun. Crocodile relatives lurk at the water's edge, eyes just above the surface, waiting for a careless amphibian. The scene is rich, full of motion, but it is also incomplete in a way we might feel more than see. There are no blossoms opening with the last rays of daylight, no perfume drifting on the breeze. The insects fly, but without the lure of nectar-filled blooms to guide them. The air is quiet of bee song, the kind of hum we now associate with summer afternoons. This is the threshold of transformation. Evolution does not hurry, yet when it makes a leap, the consequences can ripple outward for eons. Somewhere in these forests and floodplains, among plants that had already survived hundreds of millions of years, a lineage was preparing to alter its architecture. It would take parts once used for protection and reshape them into delicate petals. It would take structures designed for survival and repurpose them into signals, color, scent, form. It would enlist the sensory worlds of animals, offering food in exchange for transport of pollen. That bargain, simple yet profound, would remake Earth's surface into a tapestry of diversity. At first, it must have been subtle, almost invisible. A small plant with strange, modified leaves, pollen grains with structures that clung more tightly to the bodies of insects, seeds wrapped in coverings that hinted at fruit. These early experiments were not yet the showy blossoms of roses or lilies, but the beginning was enough. With every generation that found success, the pattern grew stronger, spreading into new environments, filling ecological niches like quiet water seeping into cracks of stone. The beauty of telling this story now, as you rest and let the weight of the day drift away, is that we can fold the enormity of time into a gentle arc. The Cretaceous stretched from about 145 million years ago to 66 million years ago, a span longer than the time from the extinction of the dinosaurs to the present. Within that arc, flowering plants emerged, diversified, and spread across continents, shaping the diets of herbivores, changing the balance of atmospheric gases, and eventually creating the fruits and seeds that would sustain countless generations of animals, including our own. But here, in the beginning, it is still only the promise of change. You might imagine standing in a meadow that is almost familiar, but not quite. Ferns wave in the evening breeze, cycads stand like sentinels, and conifers form dark outlines against the fading light. Somewhere among them grows a plant that is different. Perhaps its buds swell not into cones, but into structures softer, more delicate. When it opens, it does not scatter dry pollen into the wind, but reveals a chamber where nectar pools, a subtle lure for any insect that dares approach. Perhaps a beetle lands, clumsy but effective, brushing against pollen as it feeds, carrying grains to another bud. In that simple transaction, unnoticed by the larger creatures stomping through the forest, a new future is set in motion. And so the first flowers were not spectacles, but quiet gestures. They opened in secret, small and unassuming, yet they carried within them the blueprint for forests ablaze with blossoms, for meadows humming with bees, for the fragrance of spring mornings that we now take for granted. In the stillness of ancient nights, they unfolded delicate structures against the backdrop of a world still dominated by ferns and pines. Each bloom was a signal flare in slow motion, calling to life's endless creativity. To think of this is to feel a certain calm, because it reminds us that transformation does not need to be loud to be profound. Change can be as soft as a petal opening, as gradual as a river carving a canyon, as subtle as a seed carried unnoticed in the belly of a dinosaur. In the story of Earth, flowers are a chapter that begins in whispers, and in those whispers entire futures were written. As you listen, let yourself drift with that thought. Imagine the Cretaceous night sky above, brighter with stars than any city view allows today, each one glinting over forests where the first blossoms slowly emerged. Hear the insects in their ancient rhythms, not yet guided by floral scents, but already restless with possibility. Feel the warmth of a greenhouse climate, air rich and heavy, carrying the breath of plants that would soon redefine life itself. It is a world both alien and familiar, a reminder that beauty often starts quietly, almost unseen, before it blooms into everything. And in that recognition, perhaps you can find rest. The same earth that shaped flowers out of silence continues to shape us, even now. Every garden, every bouquet, every tree in bloom is a living echo of that Cretaceous beginning. To imagine it is to soften into time, to recognize that life's greatest revolutions can be as gentle as nightfall, as inevitable as dawn. When we speak of origins, the story rarely has a single beginning. It is more like a braided river, channels, winding, separating, and rejoining, their waters carrying fragments of truth that sometimes converge and sometimes drift apart. The origin of flowers is just such a story. Scientists, armed with fossils, with genetics, with patient observation, have tried to follow those channels back to their source. Yet the further upstream they walk, the more the paths divide, and the more the mists of deep time blur the horizon. For listeners like you and me, that mystery is not frustrating so much as enchanting. It means there is still wonder to hold on to, even in a world where data feels like it has mapped almost everything. The very air affected life in ways we still trace. Oxygen levels fluctuated through the Cretaceous, sometimes higher than today, sometimes lower. Insects of earlier ages had grown enormous when oxygen was abundant, dragonflies with wings wider than hawks. By the Cretaceous, oxygen had stabilized, and gigantism receded, but its variations still shaped metabolism, influencing how large dinosaurs could grow, how active they could be, how fires spread through forests. Lightning storms ignited wildfires across conifer and angiosperm groves, clearing space, recycling nutrients, releasing smoke that colored skies. From ash, flowers sprouted quickly, their seeds adapted to disturbance, thriving in the mosaic landscapes. Fire left behind, close your eyes and imagine one of those storms. Clouds gather over a coastal plain, winds picking up, drops of rain pattering against broad leaves. Dinosaurs lift their heads uneasily, scenting the change in the air. Thunder, cracks, lightning strikes, a tree bursts into flame, sparks carried on the wind. The storm passes as quickly as it came, leaving charred trunks, blackened soil, and a silence filled with smoke. Weeks later, the first shoots push through the ash, flowers blooming where needles once reigned. This was the rhythm of climate, destruction and renewal, a pattern written into the very heart of angiosperms, inland seas. Vast and shallow, shaped the atmosphere as well. The western interior seaway split North America in two, its waters warm and rich with life. The sea's presence moderated climate, creating humid lowlands where flowers flourished. Fossil pollen records from these regions showed diversity exploding. Blossoms adapted to wetlands, to deltas, to shifting shorelines. Dinosaurs roamed these fertile belts, their migrations tied to the rise and fall of waters, their diets reflecting the changing plant life. Where the sea advanced, coastal flowers adapted to salt and sand. Where it retreated, meadows spread, carrying blooms inland. At the planetary scale, circulation of air and oceans painted the climate in broad strokes. Jet streams shifted with continental drift, carrying storms into new lands. Warm currents flowed into polar seas, preventing ice from forming. Coral reefs thrived far from the equator, their skeletons recording water temperatures in patterns of growth bands. And above it all, the sky itself was often tinted, colored by volcanic eruptions that released gases and ash, sometimes cooling the earth briefly, sometimes amplifying the greenhouse heat. These pulses left fingerprints in sediments, moments when ecosystems faltered, only to recover and diversify again. Flowers proved resilient, their seeds enduring the swings, their forms quick to exploit openings left by disruption. As you let this vision linger, notice how atmosphere and life are inseparable. Plants breathe carbon dioxide, animals breathe oxygen, both shaping and shaped by what fills the air. In the Cretaceous, the balance tilted differently, creating worlds where forests could grow at poles, where reptiles thrived in humid valleys, where flowers seized the chance to expand. The climate was not steady, but in its fluctuations lay opportunity, and flowers were ready to take it, and so, the story of blossoms cannot be told without the story of clouds and winds, rains and sunlight, oxygen and carbon. Every petal that opened did so under a sky dense with greenhouse warmth. Every seed that sprouted did so in soils moistened by monsoons or enriched by ash. Every pollinator flew through air of different thickness, its wings moving against currents, tuned to a climate unlike ours. To imagine flowers without this atmosphere is to imagine music without air to carry sound. The two were bound, inseparable, a duet written across deep time. As the greenhouse age carried on, the very air of the Cretaceous whispered possibilities into the world below. The levels of carbon dioxide that warmed the planet did more than hold heat. They fueled photosynthesis, giving plants energy to grow with vigor. Broad-leaved angiosperms, with their more efficient vessels for moving water and nutrients, capitalized on this abundance. They spread into forests once ruled by conifers, colonized floodplains with rapid growth, and outcompeted slower species in places disturbed by storms or fire. The climate was a stage tilted in their favor, and they answered with resilience. Scientists reading isotopic signatures in fossil leaves find evidence of this heightened growth. The carbon ratios revealing how plants drew in vast amounts of the gas. Growth was not even, of course. Some regions baked under arid sun, their soils cracked and dry, while others drowned in seasonal monsoons, rivers swelling, valleys flooding. Yet even in drought, angiosperms develop strategies, some shedding leaves to conserve water, others producing seeds designed to wait in dormancy until rains returned. In wetter regions, flowers synchronized their blooms with insect rhythms, their scents stronger in the heavy air, their petals more abundant where humidity allowed them to thrive. The poles, strange as it seems, tell one of the most evocative chapters. Fossilized forests of Antarctica and Alaska showed deciduous trees, their rings recording the cycle of endless summer days and endless winter nights. Imagine standing in such a forest, the light of a sun that never fully sets filtering through, a canopy alive with leaves, and then months later, darkness settling, trees bare, snow falling lightly but never freezing the soil. In those shadowed months, seeds waited, roots held steady, flowers bided their time. When light returned, blossoms unfurled quickly, racing against the short season. They adapted to extremes, not with strength alone, but with rhythm, a patience, matched to the turning of the earth itself. Storms shaped this world too, more frequent and sometimes more violent than ours. The warmth of the seas fed them, cyclones spiraling across shallow waters, their rains flooding coasts, their winds uprooting forests. Fossilized sand layers in ancient shorelines record these tempests, deposits laid down in single violent nights. For animals they were threats. For plants they were both danger and opportunity. Fallen trees opened clearings where sunlight could reach. Floodwaters carried seeds into new valleys. Flowers, with their ability to sprout quickly, filled these gaps, painting renewal over destruction. Volcanoes added their voice to the atmosphere's chorus. The splitting countenance birthed rifts and fissures, lava pouring across lands, gases streaming into the air. Carbon dioxide surged, amplifying warmth, while ash clouds sometimes veiled the sun, cooling the planet for months or years. These fluctuations tested life again and again, but angiosperms proved resilient. Their seeds survived burial, their roots endured shifts, their diversity allowed them to spread when conditions swung. Each eruption left scars, but also new soils, rich in minerals where flowers took hold. Fires, too, were common companions in this world. With oxygen fluctuating near levels that could support rapid burning, lightning ignited vast blazes across forests. Charcoal deposits from the Cretaceous confirm their frequency. Where flames passed, flowers followed. Their seeds, carried in wind or water, colonized the open spaces, their fruits drawing animals to disturbed soils. Fires cleared conifers, making room for faster-growing angiosperms. The partnership between disturbance and renewal was written into their story, as it still is today in prairies and savannas, where fire maintains diversity. The atmosphere's gift was not just warmth, but energy, the constant turning of cycles that created mosaic landscapes. Dinosaurs adapted to these shifting climates, their migrations following rains, their diets changing with seasonal blooms. Pollinators timed their flights to match the flowering windows opened by monsoons. Even marine life felt the atmosphere's sway as rains carried nutrients into seas, fueling blooms of plankton that mirrored the bursts of flowers on land. The entire biosphere pulsed with atmospheric rhythm, an orchestra conducted by unseen winds. Close your eyes and imagine the Cretaceous. Night after a storm has passed. The air is thick, carrying the scent of wet earth and broken vegetation. Stars pierce the clearing clouds, brighter without modern haze, reflecting in pools left by rain. Insects stir again, drawn to blossoms that open in the humid dark, releasing fragrance to lure nighttime pollinators. Dinosaurs step cautiously through muddy ground, their breath steaming in the cooler air, their movements scattering petals trampled underfoot. The atmosphere is not absented, is present in every detail, in the dampness on skin, in the freshness of scent, in the calm after thunder. What lingers from this story is the reminder that climate is never merely backdrop. It is actor, director, and stage at once. The Cretaceous greenhouse gave flowers the warmth to spread, the rains to flourish, the disturbances to expand. It gave dinosaurs the fertile meadows to graze, the forests to wander, the fruits to taste. It gave insects the seasons to match their lives to blossoms, the winds to carry them farther than before. Without that atmosphere, the revolution of flowers might have faltered. With it, they thrived, leaving imprints in fossils, legacies in petals, continuities that bloom even now. So as you drift into rest, let the breath of that ancient earth accompany your own. Feel the warmth of greenhouse skies, the rhythm of storms, the patience of polar nights, the resilience of seeds sprouting after fire. The atmosphere was the unseen companion to every flower, every dinosaur, every insect of that age. It still is, wrapping us, even now, invisible but essential. To listen to its story is to listen to life itself, carried on winds that have never truly ceased. The world of the Cretaceous was not only meadows and riverbanks scattered with blossoms, it was also forests, vast and layered, their roots binding the soil, their canopies reaching toward skies colored by greenhouse warmth. If flowers were the new language of plants, forests were the books in which that language was written. They carried the rhythm of growth, the weight of time, the memory of climates shifting. To step into such a forest would have been to enter a cathedral, not of stone, but of wood and leaf. Its architecture built from trunks and branches, its light filtered through veils of foliage, its silence alive with the pulse of unseen life. Imagine walking under those canopies. Above you stretch conifers still tall and familiar, resonant and strong, but woven among them now are angiosperms, some shrubs, some climbing vines, some trees beginning to rival their older cousins in height. Their leaves are broader, casting deeper shade. Their blossoms open in patches of light, drawing insects into corners of the forest where once only ferns and moss thrived. Roots push deep, binding soil against erosion, drawing water upward, cycling, nutrients that feed layers of growth. Each level of the forest from canopy to understory to floor holds its own rhythm, its own voices in the chorus of life. Fossil evidence of these forests comes in petrified wood, in leaf impressions, in pollen trapped in sediments. In places like Mongolia, North America, and Patagonia, entire petrified forests remain, their trunks preserved in mineral form, rings visible, patterns of growth still legible after 100 million years. These forests tell of climates warm and humid, of soils rich in nutrients, of ecosystems diverse and layered. Within them, angiosperms spread steadily, filling niches left open by disturbances, weaving themselves into the structure of woodlands until they became essential. The foundation of a forest is not only its trees, but its cycles. Leaves fall, decompose, return to soil. Fires pass, clearing underbrush, making space for renewal. Floods bring silt, storms topple trunks, and in the gaps new plants rise. Flowers adapted quickly to these rhythms, their seeds lying in wait for openings, their fruits carried into clearings by animals, their blooms timed to the flush of sunlight in broken canopy. Over millions of years, they made forests more dynamic, more flexible, more resilient to change. Dinosaurs wandered through these woodlands too, not only grazing meadows, but moving among trunks, feeding on leaves, stripping branches. Herds of hadrosaurs browsed along edges, their calls echoing between trees. Ceratopsians cleared shrubs, their beaks snapping branches that fell to the ground. Sauropods pushed through like living storms, their size opening trails where light flooded in. Even predators prowled beneath these canopies, their eyes sharp in the dimness, their movements weaving through shafts of filtered sun. Each action reshaped the forest, and the forest in turn shaped them, offering food, shelter, and pathways of survival. The role of flowers here was subtle but immense. Their presence diversified diets, allowing herbivores to feed on a wider range of leaves, fruits, and seeds. Their blossoms drew insects in abundance, which in turn fed small reptiles, mammals, and early birds. Their fallen fruits nourished scavengers. Their seeds, adapted to travel, made forests patchworks of species rather than uniform stretches of conifers. With every cycle of bloom and decay, they deepened the web of connections, creating foundations for ecosystems more complex than any before. Consider the forest floor. In the Cretaceous, it would have been a tapestry of ferns, mosses, low angiosperms, and decaying leaves. Insects crawled, carrying pollen. Small mammals darted, searching for seeds or insects. Amphibians lingered near streams, their calls echoing. Softly, the canopy above filtered sunlight into dappled patches, and in those patches flowers opened, timing their brief displays to the rhythm of light. Some blossoms may have been pale, adapted to low-light conditions, their scents guiding pollinators rather than color. Others may have climbed upward, vines twining around trunks to reach the sun. Together, they stitched the understory into a living quilt, a foundation not of stone but of growth. Science shows us that forests play more than ecological roles. They are engines of atmosphere. Even in the Cretaceous, their leaves pulled carbon dioxide from air, their bodies stored carbon, their cycles influenced oxygen balance. Though human eyes would never see it, the breath of a Cretaceous forest shaped the very climate above it. Moisture released from leaves fed clouds, rainfall fed rivers, rivers fed seas. In this way, the forest was not just scenery but participant, a living system shaping land, water, and sky. Close your eyes and picture it, a warm breeze carrying scents of resin and blossom, the distant calls of dinosaurs echoing like organ notes, the rustle of leaves a quiet hymn. The ground beneath your feet is soft with needles and petals, damp with decay, alive with unseen creatures recycling life into life again. Light filters through branches in beams, dust motes floating, insects glinting. You stand in the middle of a cathedral of trees, its pillars rising, its ceiling woven of green, its silence steady but never still. The foundation of life surrounds you, built not of stone but of growth, layered upon growth, cycle upon cycle, year upon year. And in that cathedral, flowers had taken their place. They were not yet the towering trees of later ages, but they had made themselves indispensable. They offered food where none had existed, diversity where monotony had reigned, renewal where disturbance had struck. They became the foundation not only of forests but of futures, setting patterns that echo even now. Every woodland you know, every grove or park, carries within it the legacy of those first angiosperm forests, the memory of their resilience, the quiet strength of their cycles. So as you drift into rest, let yourself imagine lying beneath those canopies, the air warm and fragrant, the sounds of ancient life around you. The forest cradles you as it cradled the dinosaurs, as it cradled the insects, as it cradled the first blooms that dared to open. Its foundations are not just wood and root, but rhythm and patience, endurance and renewal. And in that steadiness, there is peace, a reminder that even in the restless Cretaceous, There were places where life gathered its strength, built its cathedrals, and prepared the world for all that was to come. There comes a moment in every transformation when the balance tips, when what was once a novelty becomes foundation. For flowers, that moment unfolded in the heart of the Cretaceous. They had crept quietly into the fabric of meadows, riversides, and forest edges, but now they spread so widely that the very rhythm of ecosystems changed. It was not only petals opening in sunlight, it was diets rewritten, migrations redirected, skies filled with new interactions between insect and bloom, seas of pollen rising like invisible tides. This was not merely evolution. It was a revolution of subtlety, a shift that would echo through every creature that walked, crawled, flew, or swam in those days. Imagine a plain where conifers once cast their shadows, dark and monotonous. Now the horizon breaks into patterns of flowering shrubs, grasses not yet present but cousins beginning their lineage, vines climbing into trees and throwing blossoms high. Dinosaurs graze not on needle and cycad alone, but on fruits swelling with sugars, on broad leaves rich with nutrients, on seeds that fed them through dry months. Fossilized dung from hadrosaurs and titanosaurs confirms this, their contents holding fragments of angiosperm leaves, shells of seeds, even pollen that clung through digestion. These traces are more than waste. They are records of a planet in transition, proof that giants had adapted to the banquet flowers offered. The insects, too, had changed their tempo. Beetles and flies still clambered, their roles ancient and enduring. But bees now joined the chorus with deliberate purpose. In amber we find them, preserved mid-flight, their legs heavy with pollen baskets. Their arrival marked a refinement. In pollination, a precision dance where flowers designed colors and scents specifically to attract them, and bees, in turn, built lives around nectar. In this exchange, efficiency multiplied and diversity blossomed like never before. The fossil record shows a surge of angiosperm pollen types during this age, an explosion of variety that matched the buzz of pollinators rising into the air. The effect rippled outward. Small mammals, nocturnal and cautious, found food in seeds and fruits, their tiny teeth leaving marks on fossilized nuts. Birds, descendants of theropods, began experimenting with nectar feeding, their beaks narrowing, their feathers dusted with pollen. Even reptiles beyond dinosaurs partook. Lizards and turtles consumed fruits, carrying seeds in their bellies. It was as if the entire animal kingdom had been invited to a banquet prepared by flowers, each species finding its place at the table. Each movement of feeding spreading the plants further still. Climate, too, played its role, amplifying the drama. Warm, humid air carried scents farther. Rainfall encouraged lush growth. Monsoons renewed forests each season. Disturbances, fires, storms, volcanic pulses opened gaps where flowers rushed in, their seeds quick to sprout, their growth faster than competitors. The fossil evidence of charcoal layers paired with angiosperm pollen tells this story. After fire, flowers dominated, their resilience unmatched, their strategies tuned to renewal. The world had become a patchwork, a mosaic of disturbance and bloom, of storm and recovery, and flowers thrived in every seam. Picture yourself lying in the grass of that plain, your body dwarfed by the dinosaurs grazing nearby, your ears filled with the hum of insects and the low calls of herds. Around you, blossoms open and close with the sun's arc, petals shifting in hue, scents rising in waves. You watch as a ceratopsian calf noses at a cluster of blooms, its beak stained with pollen. A bee darts past your cheek, heading toward a blossom shaped like a trumpet. In the distance, a sauropod sweeps its neck through a flowering tree, petals falling like rain. It is not a single scene, but a symphony of interactions. Every creature entangled in the silent plan of angiosperms. Scientists call this coevolution, the shaping of one life by another. Flowers offered nectar, and insects responded with tongues, and hairs designed to carry pollen. Animals ate fruits, and seeds adapted with tougher coats, with shapes that survived digestion, with hooks that clung to fur. Herbivores shifted diets, and plants developed chemical defenses, bitter tastes, toxins, scents that repelled or attracted. Each step was a response, and each response reshaped the step that came after. In this dance, time itself seemed to accelerate, species diversifying at rates unseen in earlier ages. The dramatic turn of this age is not loud in fossils the way a meteor strike is loud, but it is written in the numbers, in the proliferation of pollen types, in the diversity of leaves pressed into stone, in the sudden abundance of fruit remains. The Cretaceous became not only the age of dinosaurs, but the age of flowers, and the two together created a tapestry so intricate that the modern world is still woven from its threads. Every orchard, every meadow, every hummingbird that hovers over a bloom is a continuation of this golden moment, when the earth shifted gears and began to sing in color. And so, as you let this scene linger, feel the quiet drama of it. The revolution was not fire and thunder, but bloom and breath. It was not chaos, but choreography, not war, but symphony. Flowers did not conquer with force, but with patience, with scent and color, with nourishment that invited others into partnership. Dinosaurs, insects, mammals, birdsall became players in the script, and the stage of the Cretaceous lit up with blossoms. It is a story not of domination but of invitation, of the way beauty alters survival, of the way delicacy can redirect power. The expansion of flowers during the Cretaceous was not a quiet background shifted, was a reordering of life's foundations. Insects that once wandered without pattern now lived in tight synchrony with blooms. Mammals that once survived on insects and roots discovered fruits and seeds as steady resources. Birds that had only just emerged from theropod ancestors tested their beaks on nectar, their feathers dusted yellow as they carried pollen from one blossom to another. The fossil record, though fragmented, offers glimpses of this web tightening. Pollen preserved in amber beside bee wings, fruit seeds etched with the marks of rodent-like teeth, flower impressions pressed alongside feathers. Each fragment is a window into a moment when life entwined itself more deeply with petals. Hadrosaurs stand again in this story, their immense herds grazing across floodplains rich in angiosperms. Studies of their jaw mechanics suggest grinding, power that no earlier reptile possessed, perfect for processing the tough cellulose of flowering leaves. Their very success as a lineage may have been tied to these plants, their bodies built to handle the banquet. In their wake, predators followed, ecosystems thriving on abundance, food chains shifting because petals had rewritten the base of nutrition. The spread of angiosperms meant energy moved differently through the web of life sugars flowing from fruit. Proteins wrapped in seeds, nectar fueling flight. Dinosaurs may not have noticed, but they lived within the consequences. Their survival bent toward blooms. Flowers also reshaped time itself in the daily lives of creatures. Blossoms opened and closed with the sun, their scents strongest at dawn or dusk, their colors shifting under light. Insects adapted to these rhythms, buzzing most actively when blooms were richest. Dinosaurs grazing in meadows encountered fresh growth in morning light, wilted stems by evening. The cycles of plants pressed into the cycles of animals, synchronizing their movements, guiding migrations, aligning reproduction with seasons. Even the smallest change in a bloom's timing rippled outward, affecting insects, then birds, then herbivores, then predators. The earth had begun to move in a new cadence, set not only by storms and continents, but by flowers. Volcanoes erupted, seas advanced and retreated. Climates swung between wetter and drier, and still flowers endured. Their seeds were tiny survival capsules, able to wait out drought, to sprout after fire, to travel across waters. They multiplied faster than gymnosperms, their strategies tuned to renewal. Scientists call this adaptability, but when you imagine it feels like patience. A seed waits quietly as months pass, as storms roar, as herds trample above. And when the moment is rich rain falling, soil soft, sun warming, it begins again. This resilience allowed flowers to take advantage of every disturbance, turning chaos into opportunity, permanence into fragility. The emotional drama lies not only in survival, but in coexistence. Picture a Cretaceous evening, the sky washed in, fading amber light. A herd of triceratops gathers near a riverbank, their young splashing in shallow water. Along the edge grow shrubs dotted with blooms, their petals open wide to catch the last light. Bees hum around them, while a small mammal, no larger than a mouse, scurries to nibble seeds fallen to the ground. Overhead, a feathered bird flits. From branch to branch, its beak probing blossoms, wings stirring pollen into the air. And on the far side of the plain, a predator watches, its silhouette framed by the glow, unaware that even its life is touched by the rhythm of flowers. This is the new world, multitudes bound together by blooms. The fossil record affirms the scale of this revolution. Sediment cores from every continent show a sudden increase in angiosperm pollen around 100 million years ago. Leaf impressions multiply in diversity, showing shapes and veins that point to new adaptations. Amber reveals not only insects, but entire ecosystems in miniature: flowers, pollinators, even fungal spores feeding on petals. The abundance is overwhelming compared to earlier ages, as if Earth had suddenly chosen color over monotony, complexity over simplicity, rhythm over stasis. This is why some scientists call the rise of angiosperms one of the most important evolutionary events since the origin of life itself, because it restructured the whole stage upon which life performs. And yet, for all its drama, the revolution was quiet. No roar, no quake, no single instant marked its beginning. It was petals opening one by one, scents drifting unnoticed, seeds carried in bellies of giants, pollen dusting wings of bees. It was patience, repeated endlessly, until the world bent. That is perhaps the most striking lesson of this golden point. Transformation can come not only with cataclysm, but with gentleness. The power of flowers was not to strike, but to persist, to allure, to invite. They changed the earth, not by force, but by making others part of their survival. So as you settle into the stillness of night, carry this image with you: the earth in bloom, giants grazing, insects humming, seeds scattered, climates restless, and yet life weaving itself tighter together with every cycle. Dinosaurs and flowers, bees and mammals, rivers and storms, all linked in a choreography whose music we still hear in every garden. every orchard, every meadow alive with bees. This was the Cretaceous at its most alive, its most intricate, its most astonishingly beautiful. It is a memory pressed into stone, but also alive in every petal you touch, every fruit you taste, every bird you see hovering over a flower. And in this knowledge rests a gentle wonder. The world we inherit was shaped, not only by thunderous forces, but by delicate ones, by blossoms and scents, by the patience of seeds. The giants have gone, but the flowers remain, carrying with them the memory of that age, whispering its story in every bloom. The genius of flowers is not only in their blossoms, but in what follows after. A bloom is brief, a moment of color and scent, but a seed is endurance, a vessel that carries life through droughts, floods, winters, and even extinctions. Seeds are the memory of plants, their way of folding futures into tiny, durable shells. In the Cretaceous, as petals spread across continents, seeds became the hidden machinery of survival. Scattered by wind, by water, by animals great and small, every fruit that ripened was not only nourishment, but a strategy, an invitation to be carried farther, to wait longer, to endure whatever the restless earth might bring. Imagine a riverbank after a storm. The soil is dark with silt, the water still swollen, debris scattered. Among the wreckage lie seeds, some dropped by trees, some carried in the guts of animals, some released when plants were torn apart. The current moves them downstream, where they lodge in new soil, settling into cracks, waiting. Days pass, weeks pass, and in the damp ground, roots stir, shoots push upward, and the cycle resumes. Seeds are not fragile in spirit. They are toughened, armored, prepared for delay. Their coats resist decay, their inner tissues shielded, their dormancy a shield against time itself. Fossil evidence tells us that angiosperm seeds were already diverse by the mid-Cretaceous. Some were tiny and dust-like, scattered by the wind. Others were encased in fleshy fruits, designed to appeal to herbivores. Still, others bore hooks and barbs, clinging to scales or feathers. Scientists examining fossilized coprolites find intact seeds within, proof that they traveled through dinosaur bodies and germinated in new places. In amber, seeds appear preserved alongside insects, as if reminding us that dispersal is never solitary but shared among countless partners. Each type of seed was an answer to the same question: how do you survive long enough to begin again? The brilliance of seeds is their ability to wait. Dormancy is a kind of patience written into biology, a refusal to rush into a world not yet ready. Some modern seeds can last centuries, waiting in deserts until rains come. In the Cretaceous, seeds may have endured years of drought, decades of burial, only to sprout when conditions shifted. Fossil soils, polyosols, sometimes contain seed. Impressions layered with evidence of repeated cycles. Years when plants flourished, years when they vanished, years when they returned. Each seed was a gamble, but one multiplied by billions, ensuring that even if many failed, enough would succeed to carry the lineage forward. Animals became central to this survival. Herbivores that consumed fruits dispersed seeds across vast territories, their digestive systems both hazard and opportunity. A hadrosaur eating berries might destroy some seeds with its grinding teeth, but others, swallowed whole, survived the passage, enriched by nutrients, dropped miles away. Sauropods carried seeds farther still, their immense ranges making them the longest distance gardeners of their age. Small mammals, cautious but hungry, gathered seeds in cheek pouches, burying them in caches that sometimes sprouted when forgotten. Birds experimented with fruit diets, their flight extending dispersal to new heights. Each creature became an unwitting accomplice in the grand plan of seeds. Not all interactions were gentle. Some seeds evolved defenses, bitter tastes, tough shells, toxins that discouraged overeating. Dinosaurs with sensitive palates likely avoided the most noxious fruits, leaving those seeds intact to fall to the soil. Others cracked through shells, their powerful jaws turning obstacles into meals. But even then, some seeds survived. This back and forth shaped evolution on both sides. Plants experimenting with new strategies, animals adapting to them. The fossil record of tooth wear, chemical residues in sediments, and the morphology of seeds themselves tells us of these silent negotiations. These arms races hidden beneath the canopy. Close your eyes and picture a Cretaceous meadow at dusk. The air is cooling, insects are quieter, herds are settling. Along the edges, plants drop seeds into the soil. Fruits split open, their juices seeping into the ground. A small mammal scurries, collecting a handful to carry back to its burrow. A bird darts down, pecking at a berry, its wings scattering others into the grass. A hadrosaur passes, crushing stems, swallowing fruits, moving on. All of these movements weave into one story, seeds finding paths to survive. They are silent, patient, invisible to the eye in the moment, but they are everywhere, each one a container of tomorrow. The resilience of seeds also shaped ecosystems after disturbance. Fires cleared forests, and seeds sprouted in the ash. Floods drowned valleys, and seeds lodged in the new silt. Storms uprooted trees, and seeds filled the gaps. In this way, angios became specialists in recovery, their seeds tuned to take advantage of chaos. Fossil layers show bursts of angiosperm pollen after evidence of fire or flood, a sign that flowers seized opportunity quickly. This resilience made them partners not only with animals but with the forces of Earth itself, thriving where disruption had cleared the way. There is a quiet drama in this strategy. Unlike predators, seeds did not move with speed. Unlike herds, they did not travel with power. Unlike storms, they did not destroy. And yet they endured, scattered into countless futures, many lost, but enough surviving to tip the balance of life. They are reminders that survival is not always about strength in the moment, but patience across time. In the Cretaceous, that patience allowed flowers to spread into dominance, carried by seeds that waited, persisted, and began again. So as you breathe in the calm of night, imagine yourself holding one of those seeds. It is small, barely noticeable, and yet within it lies a forest, a meadow, an entire ecosystem waiting to unfold. It carries not only the memory of its parent, but the potential of generations to come. In your hand is resilience, distilled into something light enough to be carried by the wind, strong enough to last through storms. Seeds are the foundations of endurance, the quiet survivors of ages, the hidden architects of continuity. They are why flowers triumphed in the Cretaceous, why they remain with us still, shaping every landscape we know by the late Cretaceous. Flowers were no longer scattered notes in a wider score. They had become symphony, surrounding every creature with color, scent, and nourishment. Dinosaurs, long adapted to conifers and cycads, now found themselves immersed in landscapes shaped by blooms, and in that immersion, their lives bent in ways both visible and invisible. What had begun as petals unfolding along streams had become a force woven into migration, into feeding, into survival itself. The quiet drama of flowers had grown into an influence that even giants could not ignore. Imagine a herd of hadrosaurs at dawn. The light is soft, mist rising from a floodplain thick with blossoms. Adults lower their broad beaks to graze, stripping leaves, while their young nibble at fruits fallen in the night. Each mouthful carries seeds that will survive the digestive passage, dropping miles away as the herd moves. Studies of coprolites confirm it. Angiosperm seeds intact among the remains. Proof that these animals had become gardeners in motion. Their paths across the land were not only journeys of survival, but lines of dispersal, corridors of life that stretched from river to forest to meadow. Flowers had enrolled the herds into their strategy, and the earth itself bloomed in their wake. Ceratopsians moved differently, but were no less entangled. Their parrot-like beaks tore through shrubs heavy with flowers, their frills catching the light as they pushed through thickets. Some paleontologists suspect that the open spaces left behind by their grazing were filled quickly by flowering plants, faster growing than conifers. Fossil pollen layers often show bursts of angiosperm dominance after evidence of heavy herbivory in the same strata, as if these dinosaurs cleared the canvas and flowers painted it anew. To watch a line of triceratops moving through brushwood, be to see not only consumption but cultivation, the shaping of landscapes into mosaics where blossoms could spread. Sauropods, immense and deliberate, played their role on an even grander stage. Their necks reached into flowering trees, shaking branches so that petals rained down in showers. Coprolite analysis reveals fragments of angiosperm, wood, and seeds within their massive guts. Each excremental mound was a garden, rich with fertilizer, scattered with viable seeds. These giants carried blossoms farther than any insect could fly, turning their bodies into vessels of dispersal. To imagine them lumbering across plains is to imagine caravans of life in motion, every step planting a future forest. Predators, too, felt the pull of flowers, though indirectly. Carnivores followed the herds, and those herds followed blossoms. The migration paths of prey were guided by growth cycles, by blooming and fruiting, by availability of angiosperm foods. In turn, predators adapted their strategies, their hunts aligning with plant rhythms they never noticed. Even the fiercest jaws were bound to petals, their hunger tethered to the quiet flowering of fields and forests. More subtle still were the shifts in reproduction. Fossil nesting sites of hadrosaurs reveal hatchlings in regions thick with angiosperm pollen, suggesting that parents may have chosen breeding grounds where food for young would be plentiful. The timing of flowering may have influenced nesting seasons, aligning hatchings with fruiting periods that provided nutrition for juveniles. Insects attracted by blossoms became food for small dinosaurs and early birds, weaving flowers into life cycles far beyond pollination. The very act of survival, of raising young, was tuned to the blooming of the land. Amber reveals this intimacy in frozen detail. A flower preserved with pollen still attached to a beetle's back. A small bird caught mid-flight, feathers dusted with grains. A wasp trapped alongside the blossom it visited. These are not random accidents, but fragments of an ongoing dialogue, a record of the countless encounters that bound animals and plants together. To hold such a piece in hand is to hold a moment when the fates of entire lineages brushed against each other. A conversation written not in sound but in touch, in feeding, in flight, and as flowers spread, they invited competition and adaptation. Plants evolved chemical defenses, alkaloids, tannins, bitter oils to deter overeating. Dinosaurs responded with stronger jaws, complex teeth, and gut microbes capable of breaking down toxins. The arms race between plant and herbivore played out silently in every bite, fossils recording the shifts in tooth wear, in plant structures, in chemical signatures. The beauty of flowers was not only surface deep, it was strategy, resilience, a balancing act of allure and defense. Picture twilight falling over a Cretaceous plain. The herds are silhouettes now, moving slowly toward water. Blossoms close for the night, their petals folding, their scents fading. Insects retreat into shelter, their buzzing replaced by the low calls of dinosaurs settling into stillness. But, even in the dark, seeds remain in bellies, roots continue to drink, petals prepare to open again at dawn. The drama is not in sudden thunder, but in repetition, in cycles that never stop. Flowers have bound life into their rhythm, and dinosaurs, unknowingly, follow its beat. What makes this moment golden is its permanence. When the Cretaceous ended in cataclysm, when fire and dust and cold swept the earth, flowers endured. There, seeds survived in soils, in burrows, in sheltered valleys. And though dinosaurs vanished, the partnership they had shared with blossoms left marks that persist in every meadow today. The quiet revolution had succeeded. Petals had bent the course of giants, reshaped ecosystems, rewired survival. To see. It clearly is to realize that beauty, patience, and resilience are forces as transformative as fire or stone. The entanglement between dinosaurs and flowers deepened until it was impossible to separate their stories. The very landscapes of the Cretaceous bore witness to it. Floodplains transformed into gardens, forests enriched by blossoms, coastlines fringed with shrubs heavy with fruit. The ground itself seemed to pulse with this new partnership, every seedling carrying the memory of giants that had grazed nearby, every footprint pressed into soil soon softened by petals. The earth was being rewritten not by force but by invitation, and the invitations were everywhere: scent, color, nectar, fruit, seed. The fossil record shows the pace of change. Angiosperm pollen appears first in scattered grains, then surges in abundance until it dominates layers worldwide. Leaf impressions multiply in form, their Venetian patterns more varied, their adaptations more specialized. Seeds are found in coprolites from multiple continents, proof of global dispersal through animal bodies. The rise was not confined to one region, but spread with continents drifting, with climates warming, with herds moving. It was as though the entire planet leaned toward bloom, tilting into a future of petals. Dinosaurs played their roles without knowing. Hadrosaurs grazed broad swaths of angiosperm foliage, their teeth grinding steadily, leaving pollen grains in dung that would one day tell their story. Ceratopsians tore shrubs apart, clearing ground for flowers to reclaim. Sauropods carried seeds in bellies across plains, their massive shadows scattering petals beneath them. Even predators, bound by prey that followed blossoms, found their hunts tuned to cycles of bloom and fruiting. Flowers wrote themselves into every life, not as decoration, but as framework. Scientists point to chemical traces in fossil plants, evidence of toxins that evolved to resist overgrazing. In response, the digestive systems of dinosaurs adapted, microbes in their guts capable of breaking down defenses. The push and pull of this arms race etched itself into evolution, every bite and every bloom shaping the other. The quiet drama lay in this constant negotiation, a dialogue of survival where plants lured and defended, and animals consumed and carried. Each side adapted, and in adapting, both thrived. Imagine now a clearing in a Cretaceous forest. It has been opened by storm, trunks scattered, sunlight pouring in. Within weeks, shoots of flowering plants sprout from the soil, their seeds awakened by the disturbance. Dinosaurs wander in, feeding on tender growth, spreading seeds as they move on. Insects arrive, drawn by blossoms, their buzzing filling the air. Birds sweep in after them, snapping insects from petals, dusting themselves with pollen. Life rushes to reclaim the space, and flowers lead the charge, quick to fill the void. What once might have been reclaimed slowly by ferns and conifers now blooms rapidly, color spreading through the gap like fire. The resilience of angiosperms reshaped the tempo of recovery, accelerating cycles of renewal across ecosystems. In amber, we find the stillness of these moments. A bloom perfectly preserved, pollen visible on its anthers, alongside a small insect trapped mid-flight. Sometimes the resin captured entire interactions, bees frozen as they drank nectar, flies dusted with grains, even spiders ensnaring pollinators among blossoms. These tiny time capsules confirm the intimacy of the partnership, proof that the revolution was not abstract but lived daily, moment by moment, visit by visit. Each piece of amber is a window into the choreography, the silent ballet of bloom and wing that fueled the flowering world. And yet, for all this quiet success, the age carried shadows. Volcanic eruptions darkened skies, storms reshaped coasts, sea levels rose and fell, climates swung between extremes. Still flowers endured, their seeds patient, their strategies diverse, their resilience unmatched. Dinosaurs weathered these changes too, though less easily. Their size tied them to abundance, and abundance was fragile. In the background of flourishing blooms lay the inevitability of endings, a reminder that no age, no matter how abundant, lasts forever. But in the moment, the Cretaceous world was vibrant beyond imagining. Picture twilight over a broad plain, the horizon glowing in hues of red and violet. Herds move slowly, their silhouettes softened by distance. Insects hum round blossoms that remain open into the night, releasing scents stronger in the cool air. A breeze stirs petals, carrying fragrance across the darkening land. Somewhere, a predator's call echoes, low and resonant, while nearby a tree drops fruits heavy with seeds, thudding into the soil where they will wait to sprout. The whole scene is suffused with quiet drama, not of violence but of persistence, of beauty carving itself into survival. This was the golden turning point, when flowers no longer shared the earth but shaped it, when dinosaurs no longer roamed alone but moved within a world directed by blossoms. It was a partnership neither planned nor chosen, but inevitable once petals appeared. The giants carried the seeds fed the giants, insects pollinated, birds followed, mammals found niches, ecosystems thickened. Life tangled itself into complexity, and from that complexity rose resilience. As you drift toward rest, hold this image close, the earth in bloom. Herds moving, insects buzzing, seeds falling, cycles repeating. Every breath of wind carries pollen. Every footstep carries seeds. Every mouthful ties creature to blossom. It is a story of quiet domination, of beauty bending giants, of patience rewriting the stage of life. The Cretaceous was not only the age of dinosaurs, nor only the age of flowers, it was the age of their coexistence, the moment when strength and delicacy walked side by side, weaving the world we know today, to end a story about the Cretaceous. is not to end the story itself. Time has never been tidy with its chapters. The last pages of one age bleed into the first lines of another, words smudged by catastrophe, phrases carried forward in the bodies of survivors. The Great Extinction. That closed, the Cretaceous ended the reign of dinosaurs, but it did not erase flowers. Their seeds endured in soils, in burrows, in sediments, waiting for the light to return. And when it did, they rose again, carrying with them the memory of giants, the partnership of insects, the resilience that had carried them through storms. And fire. Imagine the world in those first days after the cataclysm. Skies darkened by ash, sun weakened, plants struggling. The silence broken only by wind stirring through ruined forests, seas restless under the weight of falling debris. Dinosaurs gone, their footsteps silenced, their shadows vanished from the plains, yet beneath the ground, seeds rested. Their coats held tight, their dormancy stretched like patience beyond measure. Weeks passed, months passed, and when sunlight returned, they sprouted, first in trickles, then in floods of green. The flowering plants reclaimed the land. Their resilience carried Earth into a new age, one in which mammals rose, birds flourished, and ecosystems rebuilt themselves around blossoms. The legacy of the Cretaceous is visible in every meadow you pass, every orchard heavy with fruit, every garden bright with petals. The partnership forged between flowers and animals then has never ceased. Insects still move pollen, birds still carry seeds, mammals still eat fruits and disperse them. The strategies perfected in deep time remain the same, their success proven by survival. Every breath you take carries oxygen shaped by plants. Every meal you eat owes something to blossoms that once learned to wrap seeds in sweetness, to allure partners into their cycles. The world you inhabit is not only shaped by the present, but haunted by the persistence of that ancient revolution. Scientists call the rise of flowering plants the most significant evolutionary radiation since the origin of life itself. It was not a spectacle of sudden violence, but a bloom of patience, a spread of quiet power that rewrote ecosystems. The fossil record whispers its story in pollen grains, in leaf impressions, in seeds preserved within prolites, in amber glowing with moments of pollination. These are not merely curiosities of museums. They are evidence that beauty and survival are bound, that the delicate and the immense coexist in ways deeper than appearances suggest. There is comfort in realizing that the giants did not live in barren landscapes, but in worlds softened by flowers. Every herd that grazed left behind scattered seeds. Every predator that followed them was bound by prey that depended on blooms. Every insect buzzing in sunlight was part of the same system that still hums today. The echoes of that partnership live in sparrows feeding on seeds at your window, in bees drifting across summer fields, in the fruits that fill markets and kitchens. You are surrounded by the descendants of the Cretaceous flowering world, their strategies unchanged, their patience unbroken. Close your eyes and picture a meadow, not ancient but modern. The air is filled with the hum of insects, the scent of blossoms, the rustle of leaves. Birds dart overhead, small mammals move cautiously through grass, and seeds fall silently into soil. It is not so different from the scenes painted in stone, the ones you have wandered through in imagination. The continuity is unbroken, the rhythm steady. Time has shifted, species have changed, but the structure remains. Flowers and their partners still weave the fabric of ecosystems, still anchor the cycles of life. What lingers from the Cretaceous is not just evidence, but a lesson. strength alone does not endure forever. The dinosaurs, immense and formidable, fell to catastrophe. Flowers, small and delicate, endured through patience and adaptability. They show us that resilience lies not only in force but in flexibility, not only in size but in strategy. Seeds waited, blossoms invited, cycles repeated. When disaster came, these qualities carried them through. Their survival gave shape to every forest, every field, every ecosystem that followed. As you settle into the quiet of night, think of that resilience. Think of seeds lying in soil, patient across years. Think of petals opening to invite, not to fight. Think of partnerships forged in subtlety, enduring across ages. The Cretaceous did not vanish, it transformed. Its whispers remain in stone and amber, but also in every bloom you see today. The earth, you know, is not separate from that age. Is its continuation, its echo, its flowering made present. And so the story closes, not with an ending, but with reflection. Flowers teach us that time is long, that patience outlasts turmoil, that beauty is not frivolous but powerful, capable of reshaping worlds. Dinosaurs remind us that even the mighty can live within delicate systems, that strength and fragility are not opposites but companions. The atmosphere, the forests, the storms, the seeds all together form a memory carried forward into the present. Let yourself rest with this knowledge. The earth has bloomed before and will bloom again. Seeds are waiting even now, silent beneath the soil, patient in their coats, ready for futures we cannot yet see. Life endures in rhythms slower than our noticing, steadier than our fears. The Cretaceous has not ended. It breathes in gardens, in meadows, in the voices of sparrows and the hum of bees, in the fruit on your table, in the air you breathe. Legacy is not behind us but around us, a reminder that resilience is quiet, that survival is beautiful, that the world is always flowering. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a scientist in a quiet lab, a grain of fossilized pollen resting under the lens of a microscope. It is only a few micrometers wide, yet it holds within it a signal from a world more than 100 million years gone. The grain is sculpted, ridged, shaped in ways that are not random but purposeful, signs of a lineage that had already begun to lean toward flowers. When researchers first identified such pollen from rocks dating to roughly 125 million years ago, they felt as though they had stumbled on the earliest whispers of blossoms. It was proof that by the early Cretaceous, flowering plant angiosperms were already present, already leaving microscopic fingerprints across the fossil record. But science rarely settles easily. If pollen this old exists, could the true beginnings have been earlier still? Molecular clocks, those delicate instruments, built not of gears and springs, but of DNA sequences, seemed to say yes. By comparing the genetic differences among living, flowering plants, and estimating how fast those differences accumulate, researchers suggested that flowers might have started evolving tens of millions of years before the oldest known pollen. Some calculations pushed the origin back to the Triassic, nearly 200 million years ago, when the Earth was still recovering from one of the greatest extinctions it had ever endured. The contradiction was striking. The fossils told one story, the DNA another, and the truth seemed to hover between them like a mirage. It is easy to think of science as a quest for certainty, but here we see its other face, the beauty of open questions, a fossilized leaf impression, veins branching in patterns familiar to our eyes, tells us something tangible. A genetic model built from sequences humming quietly in the cells of living oaks and lilies and grasses tells us something possible, and between them lies a silence we cannot yet fill, a stretch of time that waits for more evidence to emerge from stone or strand. For now, that silence itself is part of the story. And perhaps that is fitting, because the first flowers themselves were born into silence, unnoticed by the giants around them. Picture a Triassic floodplain, long before the Cretaceous landscapes we visited before. The rivers are wide and braided, carrying the weight of young mountains that rose from Pangaea's restless heart. Amphibians slip into the water, archosaurs stalk the banks, and the air is thick with heat. Among the ferns and cycads, perhaps a plant begins to rearrange its structures, turning protective leaves into something softer, more inviting. We have no direct fossil to prove it, only hints and genetic echoes, yet the possibility lingers. Could the first experiments with floral forms have taken place here, hidden in the shadows of an age that left us few clear records? If so, they were fragile things, perhaps snuffed out in local extinctions, perhaps persisting quietly until the world was ready for them to flourish. This uncertainty is not a flaw, but a reminder that Earth keeps her deepest histories folded close. Every new fossil site is like a page turned in a book long missing its cover. In Spain, in China, in Brazil, paleobotanists sift through layers of stone that once held ancient lakes and rivers, searching for petals pressed into shale or pollen caught in amber. Each discovery adds a note to the melody, but the melody remains incomplete, like a lullaby missing verses. Still, it plays in the imagination, and that is enough to keep us listening. Think of your own life for a moment. How often beginnings are invisible until much later. A friendship starts with a glance, a story with a sentence overheard, a forest with a single seed dropped into soil. We only recognize them as beginnings in hindsight, when time has stretched enough to reveal the arc. Flowers may have been the same to the animals that browsed among cycads and ginkgos. The first blossoms were not milestones. They were curiosities, fleeting deviations, nothing to record in the stone ledger of footprints and bones. Only much later, when blossoms spread into forests and fields, when nectar guided insects into elaborate dances, did their importance become undeniable as you rest now, listening to this quiet unfolding. Imagine yourself not as a scientist in a lab, but as a traveler in deep time. You are walking through ancient forests where the mystery is still unresolved, where the first flower may bloom beside you or may still be millions of years in the future. You cannot know for certain, and that not knowing is part of the gift. It keeps the world vast, keeps the story open, keeps the night sky above you filled with more stars than answers. The longer you linger in this puzzle, the more the pieces seem to shift in your hands. Fossils whisper one timeline, genetics hum another, and geology adds its own rhythm. Rocks preserve what chance allows. A petal pressed in mud, a pollen grain fossilized in amber, a seed caught between layers of shale. DNA preserves what life has carried forward, an unbroken thread woven through countless generations. Between the two lies a gulf of millions of years, a darkness lit only by small sparks of discovery. Some researchers call this the ghost lineage of flowers, a stretch of time where they must have existed in some form, but where evidence has not yet been found. To sit with that idea is to realize how often history leaves us gaps, and how often imagination must help us bridge them until the earth yields another clue. Consider the places where the earliest clear fossils of flowers have appeared. In northeastern China, beds of shale that once lined calm lakes hold impressions of small plants with blossoms no bigger than a fingernail. In Spain, fossil pollen grains are discovered in sequences of rock that speak of quiet valleys once warmed by Cretaceous sunlight. Each specimen, fragile and incomplete, is like a lantern held up in a dark corridor. It illuminates a small space, but the rest of the hallway stretches on unseen. The debate continues not because the evidence is weak, but because deep time is generous with its mysteries. It leaves just enough to suggest, never enough to settle. Imagine, for a moment, those early blossoms standing against a backdrop of still dominant conifers and cycads. They would not have been showy roses or tulips, but modest structures, perhaps white or pale green, pollinated not by familiar bees, but by beetles or flies, creatures already numerous and adaptable. A beetle lands, clumsy in its movements, and brushes against pollen that clings to its body. Without knowing it, the insect becomes a partner in a new story, carrying the plant's future on its back. The flower has found its courier, and evolution rewards the bargain. This simple exchange pollen for food becomes the foundation for a transformation that will ripple outward for the rest of Earth's history. What is striking is not just that flowers appeared, but that once they did, they diversified with extraordinary speed. In a span that to us feels immense, but in evolutionary terms is brief, angiosperms spread across continents. Within tens of millions of years, they had become the dominant plants on land, reshaping ecosystems that had been stable for ages. Forests grew denser, undergrowth richer, diets more varied. Insects followed suit, diversifying alongside their new partners, wings and antennae tuned to scent and color. Even the great dinosaurs, once indifferent to plants beyond their usefulness as bulk food, found themselves moving through landscapes increasingly marked by blossoms. That acceleration is one reason why Darwin himself called the origin of flowers an abominable mystery. To him, their sudden dominance in the fossil record seemed almost too abrupt, too dramatic, a leap that defied the slow pace he expected from evolution. More than a century later, we still share his astonishment. Perhaps that is why this mystery feels so captivating in the quiet of night. We are used to thinking of revolutions as loud, violent, unmistakable. Yet here is a revolution written in soft structures, in colors unseen by us, but dazzling to insect eyes, in scents that drifted unseen on the wind. It reminds us that change can be radical without being abrupt to those living through it. To the Cretaceous world, the rise of flowers was not a sudden explosion, but a slow layering of differences, each season slightly more colorful, each generation slightly more fruitful, until the entire fabric of life was transformed. As you imagine this long arc, notice how it folds into the present. The apple you slice at breakfast, the wheat that becomes bread, the coffee beans steeped into your evening drink, all descend from that ancient bargain between flower and pollinator. We are inheritors of a pact we did not witness, beneficiaries of a partnership that began in secrecy. Even the simple act of walking past a neighborhood garden at dusk, catching the faint perfume of blossoms, is to brush against the Cretaceous, to carry in our senses the outcome of a mystery still unsolved. The research continues, patient and persistent. Paleobotanists climb through cliffs and quarries, brushing dust from rocks that might reveal new impressions. Geneticists refine their models, comparing DNA across thousands of species, recalibrating molecular clocks to align with new data. Each paper, Each fossil, each gene sequence, is a note in an unfinished symphony. And like listeners gathered in the dark, we lean forward, waiting for the next phrase, knowing it may shift the melody in unexpected ways. There is comfort in this waiting. The world does not give up all its secrets at once, and perhaps that is as it should be. Just as the first flowers unfolded slowly, their petals thin and tentative, so too does our understanding unfold across time. To live with the mystery is to live with patience, to accept that some answers arrive like blossoms in spring unexpectedly, gently, and on their own schedule. So, as you rest tonight, let yourself linger in the uncertainty. Picture the early blossoms glowing faintly in the half-light of a Cretaceous dawn. Picture the insects that stumbled into their nectar, unknowingly becoming messengers of the future. Picture the silence of forests where no human eye would ever see these first experiments in beauty. The fossils tell us one timeline, the genes another. But the truth remains somewhere between them, suspended in the quiet of deep time. That space between stories is not emptiness but invitation, a place where wonder lives. And perhaps that is the real gift of this mystery. Not that it leaves us unsettled, but that it leaves us dreaming. To speak of flowers is to speak of a new grammar of life, a rearrangement of sentences that had been written in leaves and cones. For ages before, plants had long been practicing the art of reproduction, scattering spores and pollen into the wind, sending seeds drifting on currents of air or floating on streams. Theirs was a strategy of abundance, a reign of possibilities with the hope that a few would land in the right place. It was survival by numbers, patient and persistent. Yet in the Cretaceous, something more intimate began to unfold, as if plants decided to write their messages not in broad strokes across the sky, but in letters carefully delivered, each one sealed with color and scent. Imagine a world of cones cracking open in the sun, their pollen clouds rising like invisible smoke, drifting wherever the air carried them. So much energy lost to chance, grains landing on barren soil, on stone, or never reaching a compatible partner at all. For millions of years this was enough, for it had sustained forests of conifers, carpets of cycads, groves of ginkgos. But somewhere in those long seasons, a different pattern began to take hold. A plant produced structures not just protective, but inviting, reshaping leaves into delicate petals, enclosing seeds within nourishing tissue. Instead of scattering blindly, it offered a lure, a promise of nectar or fruit, to draw carriers more reliable than the wind. The invention of flowers was an act of precision in a world used to diffusion. Pollen was still produced in abundance, but now it was concentrated, packaged with intention. Petals unfolded not only to shield the reproductive organs, but to signal them, broadcasting color and fragrance to those capable of responding. The air, once indifferent, became alive with communication. Ultraviolet patterns, invisible to our eyes but brilliant to insects. Scents released at twilight to guide moths, shapes that cradled pollinators like gentle hands. Where once chance ruled, now attraction played its role. Think of the first nectar pools, tiny droplets gathered in the base of primitive blossoms. To us it would look like nothing more than dew, but to an insect it was reward, a sweet energy source rare in the ancient world. By sipping, the insect brushed against pollen and carried it onward, unknowingly delivering the plant's genetic message with far greater efficiency than wind alone ever could. In that exchange lay the heart of the floral revolution, cooperation, born of quiet need. The plant offered food, the insect offered transport, and together they shaped futures neither could have imagined. Seeds, too, changed their character. Instead of lying exposed on the scales of cones, many began to form within protective ovaries that ripened into fruits. These were gifts not to the wind but to animals, invitations wrapped in sweetness or sustenance. A dinosaur grazing on shrubs might swallow berries without a thought, but within its gut the seeds were carried safely, deposited far from the parent plant in fresh soil enriched by waste. What had been mere byproducts became strategies, each fruit a vessel with purpose, each seed a traveler with a better chance of finding home. Close your eyes and let yourself drift into this vision. A grove in the Cretaceous dawn, mist rising. From low ground, plants standing still yet alive with unseen activity. A primitive flower opens, its petals small but deliberate. The air around it carries faint scents, barely detectable to large creatures but clear to the antennae of insects. A beetle wanders close, drawn by the promise of nourishment, and in its bumbling path it gathers pollen grains that cling like golden dust. When it moves on, the dust goes with it, and a genetic bridge is formed between plants. No fanfare, no sound but the hum of wings, yet a connection stronger than any random gust of wind. There is a kind of tenderness in this, though tenderness is not a word often given to evolution. But what else can we call a strategy that turns survival into invitation, that reshapes hard cones into soft petals, that transforms bare seeds into fruits designed to be eaten and carried? Life had discovered not just efficiency but beauty, and while beauty may be a human word, the structures themselves carried elegance in their function. Flowers became not just tools but experiences, altering the senses of those who encountered them. Insects adapted, their vision tuned to colors, their tongues to nectar. Animals followed, learning to forage, to seek sweetness, to spread seeds as part of their daily wanderings. Science tells us this happened gradually, a long conversation, across millions of years. But to imagine it is to feel a suddenness, as if one morning the earth awoke to find itself different. A field that once shimmered only with ferns might now hold specks of color. A forest floor that once smelled only of resin might now carry a hint of perfume. To the dinosaurs who grazed there, the change was subtle, perhaps unnoticed. To us, looking back through the lens of hindsight, it was revolutionary. As you listen, let yourself follow that revolution at the pace of petals. Imagine the slow spirals of buds forming, cells dividing, patterns repeating. Picture pollen grains under a microscope, their surfaces ridged and spiked, each adapted for a particular carrier. Think of seeds swelling inside fruits, sugars accumulating, skins toughening or softening depending on the dispersal strategy. This is science at its most patient, biology writing instructions not in haste but in long, looping scripts across deep time, and in that patience lies something restful for us, here and now. For if flowers could emerge from cones, if sweetness could grow from survival, then perhaps our own lives to carry the possibility of quiet transformations. Perhaps what seems ordinary today may bloom into something extraordinary tomorrow, not with thunder but with the opening of a petal, the drift of a scent, the arrival of an insect at just the right moment. So let yourself rest in this unfolding. The first flowers did not know they were making history. They only opened because they were shaped to do so, because the earth's warmth and the long arc of evolution had prepared them. Yet from that opening came fruits, seeds, meadows, forests, harvests, and the meals we share each day. From that, opening came the very fabric of ecosystems that cradle us now. It began with pollen and nectar, with attraction and reward, with soft petals inviting the world closer. It began quietly, but it never ended. Every blossom you see is still part of that beginning, a living echo of the moment when reproduction became relationship, when chance became partnership, when survival became beauty. If flowers were the invitations, then insects were the guests who first answered the call, stepping into a role they had not sought, but one that would define their future. Long before the buzzing hum of bees that we know today, the Cretaceous skies and meadows belonged to beetles, flies, and other early wanderers of the air. Their wings, sometimes fragile and veined like stained glass, carried them in slow arcs. Over ferns and cycads, they were survivors of earlier ages, feeding on decaying matter, on spores, on whatever food the ancient world offered. But when the first blossoms began to appear, offering drops of nectar and grains of pollen, the insects found themselves in a partnership that neither side could have predicted. Imagine the dawn light in that age, the air thick with the sound of wings, not the chorus of cicadas or the steady drone of modern hives, but a more fragmented rhythm, each insect tracing its own pattern. A beetle clambers over a primitive flower, chewing clumsily at its tissues while dusting itself with pollen. A fly, drawn by a faint scent, lands briefly, drinks what it can, and lifts away carrying grains that cling invisibly to the hairs on its body. These are not graceful dances yet, not the refined ballet of bee and blossom, but they are enough. Each movement transfers life from one plant to another, weaving invisible lines of connection across the forest. Science tells us that beetles may have been the earliest major pollinators of flowering plants. Their chewing mouths, rough by today's standards, damaged some blossoms but also carried pollen. Fossil records of beetles with pollen grains lodged in their guts and on their bodies confirm the story. Flies too, with their opportunistic feeding, played a role, visiting early flowers with little elegance but surprising effectiveness. Later, as the Cretaceous progressed, wasps and bees evolved, closer ties to blossoms, refining the partnership into something more deliberate. But in these first chapters, it was messy and uncoordinated. A partnership born not of planning but of chance, a chance that worked well enough to take root in the rhythm of life. Close your eyes and let the scene unfold. You hear the faint hum of wings, feel the brush of air as an insect passes by. The flower does not move, rooted in place, yet it sends signals through color, through scent, through shape. The insect, restless and searching, responds. It is a conversation without words, an exchange written in sensory cues older than memory. For the insect, the flower is food, energy, survival. For the flower, the insect is courier, carrying its future to another bloom. Both gain, neither loses, and so the story deepens. What makes this story especially captivating is its subtlety. The dinosaurs that roamed nearby, massive and imposing, likely paid little attention to the tiny insects darting around shrubs. To them, the flowers were background, perhaps a passing curiosity. Yet in those small exchanges, in the brush of wing against petal, entire futures were being written. The rise of pollination changed not just plants, but insects themselves. Those that adapted to nectar and pollen thrived, multiplying in form and function. Their bodies shifted, mouthparts elongated, sensory organs sharpened, behaviors tuned to blossoms. Flowers, in turn, responded, shaping petals to fit specific pollinators. adjusting colors and opening times to match their visitors. It was a dance unfolding in slow motion, a choreography still visible today every time a bee hovers over a garden bloom. Consider the fossilized remains of early bees found in amber, their tiny forms perfectly preserved, hairs dusted with pollen from ancient flowers. To look at them is to see not only the fragility of life, but its continuity. That bee, caught mid-flight millions of years ago, carried the same mission as the bees in your backyard this summer. It was both ordinary and profound, a bridge across time linking the Cretaceous with the present. Each grain of pollen in its hairs is a message from the past, a reminder that the smallest creatures can carry the weight of transformation. As you drift with this thought, notice how insects altered the very shape of flowers. A blossom visited, mostly by beetles, might grow tough and broad, able to withstand rough feeding. One pollinated by flies might release strong odors to attract them. Later, when bees became more prominent, flowers developed ultraviolet markings invisible to us but guiding beacons to their visitors. Evolution shaped petals and insects together, each responding to the other's needs, each refining the exchange. With every generation, this coevolution was not swift, yet across millions of years it built a tapestry of relationships so intricate that entire ecosystems came to depend on it. There is something comforting in realizing that the hum of a bee, the shimmer of a butterfly, the flicker of a moth's wing are not just background sounds of summer, but echoes of a deep time story. Every buzz is a continuation of that first accidental visit, every blossom today an heir to those primitive flowers that dared to lure insects closer. We are surrounded by the legacy of that ancient pact, even if we notice it only when sitting still long enough to hear the quiet. The rhythm of this partnership is easy to miss in our hurried lives, but here, in the gentle telling of it, you can let yourself feel it. The insect drifts from bloom to bloom. The flower waits, still but open, patient in its offering. The air holds the exchange, carries the scents and signals, completes the circuit. It is a loop as steady as breath, as ancient as dawn, and as enduring as life itself. As time unrolled across the Cretaceous, the relationship between flowers and insects grew richer, like a melody gaining new harmonies. Beetles and flies had been the rough first players, chewing, bumping, scattering pollen by accident. But soon wasps began to soften their ways, feeding not just on other insects but also on nectar. From their lineage, bees emerged, and with them, the story took on a new rhythm. Where beetles had been clumsy and flies opportunistic, bees were purposeful. They did not stumble into flowers, they sought them. They gathered pollen, not only as transport, but as food for their young, weaving entire life cycles around blossoms. In this change, the quiet bargain deepened. Flowers could now rely on visitors who returned again and again, faithful partners rather than chance acquaintances. Imagine an early meadow under a Cretaceous sun, scattered with shrubs and low plants whose blossoms were simple but insistent. A small bee, still primitive compared to the honeybees we know today, hovers, then lands, its legs already dusted golden. It moves deliberately, guided by patterns of color invisible to larger eyes but radiant under the ultraviolet spectrum. To us, the flower might look plain, but to the bee it is lit with runways and arrows pointing the way to nectar. With every sip, the bee brushes against stamens and pistils, collecting pollen that will feed its young while carrying grains that ensure the plant's future. Insects had become farmers of a sort, tending to blossoms not out of charity but because their survival depended on it. The fossil record holds silent testimony to this deepening partnership. A piece of amber from Myanmar preserves a tiny bee more than 100 million years old, frozen in its moment of flight, with pollen clinging to its legs. It looks almost modern, a sign that by then the floral insect alliance was already well underway. When scientists peer at that amber, they see more than an insect. They see a promise, fulfilled and ongoing, that the smallest of creatures can shape the largest of landscapes. That amber glows not only with resin hardened through ages, but with the light of continuity. A thread that connects deep time to every garden blooming today. Flowers, in turn, adapted in ways that reveal how sensitive evolution can be. Some shaped their petals like funnels, ensuring insects brushed against pollen as they entered. Others adjusted their opening and closing to match the daily activity of their partners, releasing scent at dusk for moths, brightening colors at noon for bees. The variety of strategies reads like a library of experiments, each refined across generations. Some succeeded and flourished, others failed and vanished, but the story as a whole pressed forward. The diversity of angiosperms expanded, filling landscapes with color, texture, and rhythm. It is tempting to imagine this coevolution as a kind of slow choreography. Picture the insects as dancers, the flowers as stage and partner, the air as music. No audience applauded, no choreographer directed, yet the steps fell into place. A beetle clings, a fly darts, a bee hovers, each motion shaping the next design of a petal, the next refinement of nectar. Over millions of years, the dance grew more complex, until entire ecosystems moved to its rhythm. As you listen now, let the sound of wings fill your mind, not loud, not insistent, but steady, like a pulse. The insects are everywhere in this world, skimming rivers, circling shrubs, resting on tree trunks. Each carries traces of pollen, invisible dust that binds them to plants. Without realizing it, they are couriers of continuity, weaving connections across valleys and mountains. Flowers, rooted in place, depend on these wanderers to extend their reach, to connect one grove with another, one meadow with another. Insects became the legs of plants, their wings the vessels of genetic possibility. Even the great dinosaurs, indifferent at first, felt the influence indirectly. Herbivores that grazed found new foods as fruits developed. Predators followed the herds into richer lands. Birds, themselves descendants of small, feathered dinosaurs, adapted to sip nectar, adding their flight to the pollination story. What began with beetles clambering on primitive blooms widened into a vast web that tied together plants, insects, reptiles, and early mammals. The floral revolution was not limited to petals and pollen. It reshaped entire food chains, entire landscapes. When Darwin puzzled over the sudden spread of flowering plants, calling it an abominable mystery, he was sensing not only the gaps in the fossil record, but the speed of this transformation. Insects were the accelerants, the quiet engines that made flowers gamble pay off. With their help, plants no longer scattered life to the wind in hope. They directed it, targeted it, refined it. In return, insects found steady nourishment, reliable shelters, a path toward diversification that would one day lead to the dazzling array of species we see today. Now, in your own life, think of a summer afternoon, a garden buzzing, the air alive with bees and butterflies. What you are hearing is the echo of that ancient pact, still honored after 100 million years. The rhythm has not broken. The dance has not stopped. Every sip of nectar is a continuation of the story. Every grain of pollen a new line in the script. To realize this is to feel both small and connected, part of a continuity larger than memory, larger than history. Stretching from the Cretaceous meadows to the flowers blooming outside your window, so as night deepens around you, let the hum of that story guide you toward rest. Picture the insects of long ago, clumsy but earnest, tracing paths across primitive blossoms. Picture the bees in amber, frozen yet eternal, carrying their golden dust. Picture the flowers themselves, patient and rooted, reshaping their forms to better welcome their visitors. It is a cycle without haste, a dance without end, a lullaby written not in notes but in wings, petals, and time. And as you breathe slowly, matching the rhythm, you join that story too, resting inside its endless, gentle continuity. When we imagine dinosaurs, we picture them moving through forests of towering conifers, their footsteps muffled by carpets of ferns, their silhouettes framed against cycads and ginkgo trees. For a long time, that picture was true. The age of reptiles unfolded in green tones, plants built for endurance rather than allure, landscapes designed for survival rather than display. Yet during the Cretaceous, as flowers quietly multiplied, those familiar giants began to encounter something new underfoot and overhead. Dinosaurs and blossoms shared the same stage, and though the animals may never have noticed their quiet companions, their lives and fates became entwined in ways subtle but profound. Picture a herd of sauropods. At dawn, their long necks sweeping across a valley. Their bulk shapes the land as surely as rivers and winds, stripping branches of needles and fronds, leaving broken trees in their wake. Around them, smaller dinosaurs forage, picking at low vegetation, snapping stems with quick bites, and beneath, their feet, hidden in the trampled grass-like undergrowth, early flowering plants spread their roots. They are not showy yet, not the colorful blooms of modern meadows, but they are persistent. They sprout in disturbed soil, rebound after grazing, find niches along riverbanks and floodplains. In this way, the presence of dinosaurs becomes not a threat, but an opportunity. Every heavy footfall creates gaps where sunlight reaches the ground. Every bite that clears conifer needles makes space for blossoms to claim. Scientists studying fossilized duncoprolites have found traces of flowering plants inside. Evidence that dinosaurs were not just passing by but eating them. Seeds, encased in protective coats, survive digestive tracts, later germinating far from their parent plants. In this unplanned partnership, dinosaurs became gardeners, dispersing flowers across landscapes as vast as continents. A hadrosaur, wandering through wetland meadows, swallowed fruits without thought. Later, as it traveled miles away, it left behind seeds deposited in nutrient-rich soil. The plant's gamble on sweetness had paid off. The dinosaurs moved not just their bodies, but the very genetic future of flowers. The relationship was not one-sided. Flowers changed the diets and behaviors of herbivores too. As angiosperms diversified, offering leaves softer than cycads, seeds more nutritious than cones, and fruits filled with sugars, dinosaurs found new foods in abundance. Herds could linger in areas where blossoms thrived, altering migration patterns, creating pressure on predators to follow. A valley once dominated by monotonous greenery now offered variety, a mosaic of flavors that supported larger populations of herbivores. And with more prey, carnivorous dinosaurs adapted as well, their lives indirectly tied to the success of petals and pollen. Imagine the scene through slow motion. A hadrosaur lowers its head to crop vegetation. The plant it eats is no longer needle-leaved conifer, but a broad-leaved angiosperm, its tissues rich in different chemical defenses and nutrients. The dinosaur chews with dental batteries more complex than those of earlier herbivores, a reminder that as plants evolved, jaws and teeth evolved with them. Over millions of years, this arms race between plant and eater sculpted both sides, leaving fossils that tell of co-adaptations, flowers spreading faster where grazers carried them. Dinosaurs adjusting their diets to match new resources. There are traces of this shift in pollen records too. Core samples from ancient sediments show a sudden rise in angiosperm pollen during the mid-Cretaceous. The spread was not uniform. Some regions bloomed earlier than others, but the overall pattern is unmistakable. As blossoms flourished, ecosystems grew more complex. Insects buzzed between flowers, mammals nibbled seeds at night, and dinosaurs wandered through an increasingly colorful world. Even if their eyes did not perceive color as vividly as ours, their lives were immersed in the outcomes of that change. More food, more habitats, more resilience in the ecosystems that supported them. The thought of dinosaurs among flowers softens their image. We are used to seeing them as titans in harsh worlds, locked in battles of tooth and claw. But here we glimpse them in quieter moments, herds moving through blooming meadows, juveniles nibbling fruits, predators following trails scented not only with blood but with crushed blossoms. Perhaps a triceratops calf paused to sniff at a strange bloom, or a towering sauropod brushed against flowering branches, scattering petals like snow. We will never know their exact awareness, yet fossils remind us that they lived within these landscapes, shaped them, and were shaped by them in this way. The rise of flowers added tenderness to the Mesozoic stage. The giants that roamed it were still formidable, but they were surrounded by signs of delicacy and color, by scents carried on the wind, by seeds quietly waiting for transport. The contrast is striking, thunderous footsteps echoing across valleys where petals opened at dawn. Life does not choose between strength and softness. It holds both at once, weaving them together into worlds we can still imagine. And as you breathe slowly, settling into the calm of this story, picture yourself walking behind those herds. The air is warm, humid with the breath of plants and animals. You step carefully among trampled stems, noticing patches where blossoms peek through, resilient and unbroken. Insects hum round your ears, landing briefly before darting off again. The dinosaurs move ahead, their silhouettes massive against the horizon, but the flowers at your feet are just as much a part of the story. Together they create a world that is alive in every sense, a partnership unfolding in silence. A reminder that even giants depend on the smallest blooms to carry the future forward as the Cretaceous progressed. The partnership between dinosaurs and flowers only deepened. Different groups of dinosaurs began to leave distinct marks on the landscapes they crossed. The hadrosaurs, with their wide, grinding dental batteries, were perfectly suited for feeding on the tougher leaves of angiosperms, breaking them down with efficiency unmatched by earlier herbivores. Fossilized jaw structures show that their teeth formed complex surfaces, renewing themselves in endless replacement cycles, an adaptation that mirrored the rise of new kinds of vegetation. Where hadrosaurs grazed, angiosperms spread faster. Their seeds carried in the animals' bodies, their stems pruned but not destroyed, ready to sprout again when rains returned. Ceratopsians, with their great frills and parrot-like beaks, also took part in this unfolding story. Their sharp shearing jaws could strip branches and crop low plants, leaving open spaces where flowers might flourish in sunlight. Imagine a herd of triceratops moving across a plain, heads swinging low, beaks snapping stems with rhythmic certainty. Behind them, petals crushed underfoot release scents into the air, subtle but pervasive, mingling with the musk of animals. The scene is not just one of consumption, but of renewal. For in their passing, the dinosaurs created conditions that encouraged flowering plants to seed and root anew. Even the giants, the sauropods, played their role. Their long necks swept high into canopies, clearing branches that allowed light to fall on the forest floor. Studies of their coprolites reveal fragments of angiosperms, suggesting they did not rely solely on conifers, but sampled widely, incorporating new plants into their diets. Every seed that survived the journey through a sauropod's immense gut became a traveler across great distances, deposited in fresh soil along riverbanks or floodplains. In this way, the largest creatures on land acted as gardeners for the smallest blooms, spreading diversity with every step of their migrations. Theropods, too, were not untouched by this transformation. While many were carnivores, some smaller species were omnivorous, nibbling fruits or seeds alongside meat. Fossilized stomach contents and toothwear patterns hint that even predators occasionally consumed plant matter. For them, flowers offered hidden calories, fruits that could sustain them when hunting failed. Over time, these habits may have influenced the evolution of birds, descendants of theropods, many of whom still sip nectar today. The hummingbird's delicate hovering is thus a distant echo of dinosaurs that once paused to feed on berries. In ancient forests, the fossil pollen record mirrors these interactions. In cores taken from sediments across the globe, scientists trace the steady rise of angiosperms, noting surges that align with the diversification of herbivorous dinosaurs. The coevolution is not always simple to untangle, but the patterns suggest a feedback loop. As flowers spread, herbivores found new resources, and as herbivores dispersed seeds, flowers spread further still. It was a system of give and take, unconscious cooperation that shaped the very structure of Cretaceous. Ecosystems. Picture such an ecosystem as the day moves from morning to twilight. Insects hum from blossom to blossom, carrying pollen with delicate precision. Hadrosaurs graze in the background, their cores echoing like distant horns. A family of ceratopsians moves cautiously through shrubs, their young stopping to mouth tender shoots. High above, a sauropod pulls branches from a tree, petals drifting down like pale confetti. Even predators circle at the edges, their eyes catching glints of color among the greenery. All of it is tied together by the presence of flowers, unassuming, yet indispensable. The silent architects of the scene. There is something almost tender in imagining dinosaurs against this floral backdrop. We are accustomed to thinking of them in stark, green-brown worlds, framed by primitive plants, their lives harsh and brutal. But to envision them amid blossoms softens the image, makes the Cretaceous feel less alien, more like a prelude to the worlds we know. It is not hard to see a hadrosaur pausing as a petal brushes against its muzzle, or a triceratops calf scattering flowers as it stumbles playfully through a meadow. The juxtaposition of massive bodies and fragile blooms reminds us that life is always a balance of strength and delicacy, and that even the most formidable creatures live within the grace of ecosystems shaped by the smallest innovations. Scientists have suggested that the success of flowering plants may have contributed, indirectly to the eventual success of mammals after the age of dinosaurs. By providing diverse foods, seeds, fruits, nectar, angiosperms created niches that smaller animals could exploit, laying foundations for later ecosystems. But in the age of dinosaurs, those same foods sustained giants. The sweet pulp of fruits, the nutrition of seeds, the variety of leaves all flowed through the bodies of reptiles that ruled the earth. Without dinosaurs, flowers may still have spread, but their journey would have been slower, more uncertain. With dinosaurs, their seeds traveled miles each day, scattered across continents. As night settles in your imagination, let the scene grow quieter. The dinosaurs move off, their silhouettes fading into distance, but the flowers remain. Petals close with the dimming light, scents linger in the air, seeds wait in soil disturbed by heavy feet. The insects quiet their buzzing, tucking themselves into hidden places. What endures is the partnership itself, a partnership born without intent, yet destined to shape the planet. Dinosaurs and flowers were unlikely allies, one vast and thunderous, the other delicate and still. But together they redrew the patterns of life. Now, when you walk through a modern meadow, when you see birds feeding on nectar or deer browsing among flowering shrubs, you are glimpsing the legacy of that age. Every bloom is a memory of the Cretaceous, every pollinator a continuation of ancient lines, every seed dispersal a whisper of the time when dinosaurs walked among flowers. To rest in that thought is to feel the continuity of life, the way small innovations ripple outward, linking ages together. It is a reminder that beauty can thrive beside power, that even giants once depended on petals, and that the future is always carried forward in quiet exchanges we may not notice until much later. The earth of the Cretaceous was not still. Beneath the quiet rhythm of rivers and the heavy breaths of forests, the planet itself was restless. Plates shifted, cracked, and drifted, carrying continents like slow rafts across an ancient sea. It is easy for us, with our brief lifespans, to imagine the ground as solid, immovable. But in deep time, the continents wander, colliding and parting like clouds across a sky of stone. During the Cretaceous, those wanderings created new coastlines, new climates, and new opportunities for life. Flowers, already beginning their quiet spread, found in these changes the chance to multiply into endless forms. Imagine the supercontinent, Pangaea, as a puzzle slowly breaking apart. By the early Cretaceous, it had already begun to split into northern Laurasia and southern Gondwana. The rifts widened into seas, shallow waters flooding into lowlands, separating populations of plants and animals that had once mingled freely. Isolation is a powerful tool of evolution. When groups are cut off, they begin to change in their own directions, adapting to local soils, local rains, local pollinators. For flowers, this fragmentation was not a setback but an opening. Each new continent became a canvas, each new coastline a stage where petals could take root in different ways. Picture a valley on the margin of a young Atlantic Ocean, its waters stretching wider each century, its tides reshaping the land. The air carries the salt of distant waves, and in the meadows just inland, flowers bloom in forms slightly different from their cousins across the sea. The insects that visit them are local, their preferences shaping the blossoms in turn. A beetle in South America favors one scent, and flowers there evolve to match it. Across the widening gap, a wasp in Africa favors another, and blossoms there bend toward its taste. In this way, Continental drift writes its story not only in mountains and seas, but in the subtle design of petals and stamens. Geology preserves evidence of these restless shifts. Basalt flows mark the birth of new ocean crust, fossilized shorelines record where waves once lapped, and sediment cores carry pollen that drifts like tiny time capsules. In layers corresponding to different ages, scientists find changes in pollen types, revealing how angiosperms diversified region by region. Where the land stretched toward the equator, climates were hot and wet, supporting lush forests. Closer to the poles, long summers and winters tested plants in other ways, rewarding those that could endure extremes. Flowers answered in kind, some adapting to monsoonal cycles, others to seasonal droughts, others to perpetual twilight. Each environment carved its own designs, sculpting diversity into the heart of angiosperms. Consider the climates themselves. The greenhouse world of the Cretaceous was warm, with high levels of carbon dioxide, no permanent ice at the poles, and seas that reached far inland. Rain fell in patterns guided by shifting winds, creating belts of wet and dry across continents. In some regions, vast inland seas shimmered under heavy skies, their shores rich with flowering plants that thrived in fertile soils. In others, deserts stretched, and only hardy blooms survived, their seeds lying dormant until rains returned. Every variation in climate was another test, another chance for flowers to adapt and expand. As you let this scene unfold in your imagination, notice the patience of it all. The continents did not drift overnight. They moved centimeters per year, slower than a fingernail grows. Yet across millions of years that slow crawl redrew the map of the world. Mountains rose, valleys sank, and coastlines reshaped themselves. With each change, flowers adjusted. A river changing course left behind floodplains where blossoms could spread. A mountain lifting created new slopes where species adapted to altitude. A sea withdrawing exposed new land ready for colonization. The story of flowers cannot be told without the story of Earth itself, for it is the ground beneath their roots that sets the stage. The spreading continents also influenced animals, and, in turn, animals influenced flowers. Herbivores isolated on one landmass developed diets suited to the blossoms available there. Pollinators adapted to local climates, carrying preferences that shaped floral forms. In South America, the ancestors of certain bees began their long history, while in Asia, flies and beetles continued their roles. Each continent wrote its own version of the same story, a library of variations all pointing back to the same quiet innovation, the petal's lure, the nectar's promise. At night, when the Cretaceous skies glowed with stars brighter than any modern city allows, these worlds felt vast and endless. Dinosaurs roamed continents that no longer touched, insects traced arcs between blossoms, and flowers waited in silence for their partners to arrive. The Earth's drifting plates had set them apart, yet in their separations new harmonies were composed. Diversity is born of distance, and the planet itself had written distance into its design. Even today we see the echoes. The flowers of South America differ from those of Asia, not just in species, but in deep lineages. The drifting continents left fingerprints in petals and pollen, a record written not in stone alone, but in the living tapestry of plants around us. To walk through a modern garden is to walk through a map of ancient tectonics, each bloom carrying within it the memory of separation and adaptation. So let your mind drift with the countenance, slow as a dream, steady as a tide. Picture them sliding, apart, the oceans widening, the climates shifting, and in every corner of that restless world, flowers unfolding in forms shaped by place. It is a story without haste, a lullaby written in stone and bloom, reminding us that even the ground beneath our feet is never truly still, and that beauty often arises from movement we cannot see until ages have passed. If flowers were the great invention of the Cretaceous, their power did not come from suddenness, but from rhythm. Plants have always lived by rhythms, their lives measured not in days, but in cycles of seasons, in pulses of rain and sun, in the long sweep of geologic time. When we speak of growth, we imagine something immediate, a sprout breaking the soil, a leaf unfurling overnight. But in truth, growth is slow music, a score written across years and centuries, each note stretched beyond our hurried hearing. Flowers, in their quiet persistence, remind us of that music. They were not a flash but a heartbeat, repeating steadily until the world around them shifted to their pace. Imagine kneeling at the edge of a Cretaceous meadow at dawn. The ground is cool, damp with last night's dew, and from it rise shoots. Still young, their stems thin but determined. Beneath the soil, roots stretch invisibly, seeking water and minerals, winding around stones, spreading into unseen cracks. Above, leaves slowly unfold, cells filling with chlorophyll, capturing sunlight. The act is so gradual it feels like stillness, yet in reality it is constant motion, every cell alive with division, with energy, with work. This is the rhythm of plants. Outward stillness, inward activity, a reminder that not all life speaks. In movements we can see seeds, especially, embody this patient rhythm. They lie dormant for months, years, sometimes centuries, holding within them the instructions for entire forests. A seed from the Cretaceous might have fallen into soil, buried by floods, forgotten by passing herds of dinosaurs. Yet given the right rain, the right warmth, it would awaken, pushing a root downward and a shoot upward, repeating the same ancient pattern that seeds still follow today. Scientists studying fossilized seeds find remarkable similarities to those we know now, proof that the essential design has endured almost unchanged. Evolution perfected patience early, and flowers only added to it by packaging seeds in fruits, by timing their release to seasons, by inviting animals to spread them further. Consider how growth mirrors breath. Just as lungs expand and contract, plants inhale carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen, a rhythm invisible but essential. Just as hearts beat in steady pulses, plants add rings to their trunks, each a measure of time passed. In the Cretaceous forests, of flowering trees thickened year by year, their trunks recording rains and droughts, warmth and cold, in the language of rings. To stand among them was to be surrounded by clocks that marked time not in hours, but in decades. Every bloom that opened, every fruit that ripened, was one more measure in the symphony. There is comfort in aligning ourselves with these rhythms. Our own lives feel hurried, rushed by calendars and alarms, yet here is a story of growth that knows no haste. A flower does not open faster for impatience. A seed does not sprout sooner because of expectation. They move at the pace of earth, itself steady, deliberate, faithful to cycles older than memory. In the Cretaceous, this patience allowed flowers to spread across continents. They did not conquer by speed but by rhythm, by repeating their cycle over and over until landscapes bent around them. Picture a season in slow unfolding. Early rains soften the soil, seeds stir, shoots rise. Insects arrive, guided by scent, carrying pollen. Blossoms open, then fade, fruits swell, then fall. Seeds scatter, some eaten, some buried, some carried away by wind or water. The season ends, leaves wither, stems collapse, but underground roots remain, seeds wait, and then the cycle begins again. Multiply this not by years but by millions of years, and you begin to sense the persistence of flowers, their rhythm echoing across ages. Scientists today can trace this rhythm in fossilized forests. In petrified wood, they see rings of growth frozen in stone, each marking a year of life in a tree that stood 100 million years ago. In layers of pollen pressed into sediments, they see cycles of abundance and scarcity, reflecting shifts. In climate and ecology, each record is a fragment of rhythm, a measure of the larger music. Together, they tell us that plants lived not only in time, but with time, shaping and shaped by its flow, and in that rhythm, flowers found their strength. By synchronizing with pollinators, by timing their blossoms to the seasons, they amplified their chances of survival. A bloom that opened too early might find no partner, too late and it might be missed. But when aligned with rhythms of insects and climate, the chances multiplied. It is not unlike a dance, where steps must match the music, where timing is as important as form. Flowers became dancers in the great rhythm of life, their movements subtle but precise. At night, under the stars of a Cretaceous sky, the rhythm did not stop. Roots still pushed, cells still divided, seeds still dreamed in their shells. To us, the darkness feels like pause, but to plants it was continuation, another verse in the song. Even now, if you sit quietly in a garden at night, you may feel it, the faint sense of growth ongoing, of life persisting just beneath perception. It is a rhythm that cradles sleep, steady as breath, endless as time. So as you rest, let yourself fall into that rhythm. Think of seeds waiting patiently, of roots spreading slowly, of leaves unfurling in silence. Think of forests marking decades in their trunks, of blossoms timing their openings with the rising of the sun. Think of a world where change happens, not in bursts, but in cycles, each turn carrying the promise of renewal. That was the rhythm of plants in the Cretaceous, and it is still the rhythm of life today, a gentle music beneath the noise, guiding us toward patience, reminding us that even the smallest bloom moves with the pulse of the earth itself. To speak of flowers in the Cretaceous is to speak of ghosts. They are not with us in flesh and color, their petals long since turned to dust, their scents carried away on winds that ceased 100 million years ago. And yet, through stone, through amber, through the most delicate traces preserved in Earth's archives, we can still glimpse them. Fossils are not just bones and shells. They are whispers of moments when life brushed against mud or resin and left its signature behind. For flowers, those signatures are often subtle tiny grains, faint impressions, delicate outlines pressed into rock. But they are enough. They tell us that blossoms did unfold in those ancient landscapes, that their presence was more than imagination. Imagine walking through a museum after hours, the lights dimmed, the halls quiet. In a glass case rests a slab of shale, its surface smooth except for the faint imprint of a flower no larger than a coin. The petals are spread, slightly blurred by time, but their symmetry is clear. Scientists who study such impressions spend hours under magnification, tracing veins, counting sepals, matching forms to families. Each detail is a clue, a connection between the living and the vanished. That imprint may be 120 million years old, yet it speaks directly to us, telling us that somewhere, in a meadow or beside a river, a flower once opened to the sun. Fossilized pollen offers another window, one both fragile and abundant. Pollen grains are built to endure. Their outer walls are made of sporopollenin, a substance resistant to decay. In sediments laid down during the early Cretaceous, researchers have found grains shaped and ornamented in ways unique to angiosperms. Some bear ridges, others spines, others patterns that suggest adaptation for transport by insects. Under a microscope, these grains glow with complexity, as if tiny sculptures carved with precision. Each grain is a time capsule, proof that flowering plants had already taken root. Layer by layer, geologists trace their spread, seeing how angiosperms moved from region to region, leaving trails of dust that outlasted petals and stems. Amber preserves the story with an intimacy no stone can match. Drops of resin dripping from coniferous trees sometimes captured blossoms whole, sealing them in golden light. Within such amber, scientists have found flowers so perfectly preserved that their colors still faintly shine, their pollen still clings to stamens. Some even contain insects caught mid-visit, a fly dusted with pollen grains, a bee frozen as it reached into a bloom. To look at such a piece is to feel time collapse, to see a moment from 100 million years ago held as if it happened yesterday. The insect never left the flower never wilted, the pollen never fell. The scene is suspended, eternal, waiting for human eyes to rediscover it. There are seeds too, fossilized within sediments or mineralized in detail. Some show the beginnings of protective coats, adaptations that made dispersal more effective. Others are found in coprolites, proof that dinosaurs ate fruits and carried seeds in their bodies. In each case, the fossil is not just an object, but a story, a seed carried by wind into a river, a fruit swallowed and buried in waste, a flower pressed into mud by the weight of a storm. Nature recorded these events without intent, and yet they became records we now read as carefully as diaries. The fossil record is never complete. Whole forests once bloomed without leaving a trace. Petals decay quickly, stems collapse, seeds rot unless preserved by chance. What survives is a fragment, a puzzle missing more pieces than it contains. And yet, those fragments are enough to reconstruct the outlines. In Spain, impressions of early blossoms show us that by 125 million years ago, angiosperms were already diverse. In China, fossil beds reveal tiny flowers with intricate forms, suggesting that complexity arose earlier than once thought. In Brazil, pollen records mark their spread across the southern continents. Each discovery is a lantern lit in the darkness of time, illuminating a few more steps of the path. Scientists treat these fossils with reverence. A grain of pollen under the microscope is handled like treasure, each slide prepared with care, each observation recorded with precision. It is not just science, but listening, an act of patience. They know that each fossil is a survivor, the one in a million that endured storms, burial, pressure, and the long wait of geologic ages. To find such a survivor is to hold a piece of deep time, to touch the evidence that flowers were there, blooming while dinosaurs walked and seas shifted as you let this image settle. Imagine yourself drifting through those museum halls at night. The fossils are around you, silent and still, yet alive with stories. In one case, amber glows, trapping an eternal spring. In another, stone carries the faint shadow of petals long gone. In another, a microscope projects the ridged surface of a pollen grain, tiny yet monumental in what it represents. The air is hushed, but if you listen closely, you might hear the echo of buzzing wings, the faint rustle of leaves, the quiet unfolding of flowers long vanished. The evidence is not only for the past, it frames our present too. Every bloom you see today is linked by invisible threads to those fossils. The patterns of veins in petals, the shapes of seeds, the textures of pollen, they echo designs tested in the Cretaceous. By studying fossils, scientists see not just what was lost, but what endured, what worked so well it carried forward into our world. Fossil flowers are reminders that the beauty we admire in gardens and wild fields is not new but ancient, rooted in experiments that succeeded through patience and persistence. There is something soothing in that thought. Even as continents drifted, climates changed, and species vanished, flowers continued, leaving traces we now gather like scattered notes of a song. To imagine them is to hear that song again, faint but steady, humming beneath the surface of stone. The fossils are not just records of endings. They are confirmations of continuities, proof that life persists, adapts, and blooms again. So as you breathe slowly, settling into rest, let those fossils surround you in your imagination. Picture the amber glowing beside your bed, holding an eternal blossom. Picture the thin slabs of stone carrying the shadows of petals. Picture the pollen grains, countless and indestructible, drifting through time until they reached a microscope's lens. They are the echoes of ancient flowers, still whispering in silence, still telling us that even in the deepest ages, life sought beauty. When we return to the image of dinosaurs among flowers, it is not as a fleeting curiosity, but as a central turning point in Earth's story. The giants had long ruled landscapes painted in conifer green, fern shadows, and cycads standing like armored sentinels. But as the Cretaceous deepened, they began to wander through places where blossoms dotted the ground, where petals brushed their scales, where fruits ripened in clusters along their paths. The mingling of dinosaurs and flowers was not just coincidence. It was a partnership that reshaped both plant and animal worlds, a quiet alliance unfolding beneath thunderous footsteps. Picture a broad valley near the edge of an inland sea, waters stretching out like a silver mirror under the sun. Herds of hadrosaurs graze in the shallows, their beaks snipping broad-leaved angiosperms, their grinding dental batteries chewing pulp into fine paste. Studies of their fossil teeth reveal surfaces designed not for pine needles or cycads alone, but for the more varied textures of flowering plants. Their diets had shifted, their bodies adjusting to the new abundance. Fossilized dung, analyzed grain by grain, preserves seeds of angiosperms, evidence that flowers had become not just decoration but sustenance. In their wandering, these dinosaurs carried seeds across miles, dispersing them in rich soil, leaving trails of future meadows behind. Ceratopsians, too, found their place in these landscapes. With their massive frills and parrot-like beaks, they cropped shrubs and tore at branches. Triceratops and its kin likely browsed among mixed vegetation, and in doing so, cleared space where flowering plants could flourish. Imagine their herds, moving slowly across a plain, the sound of stems snapping beneath beaks, petals scattering like confetti into the air. The flowers did not resist. They adapted, producing seeds strong enough to endure, fruits sweet enough to invite, leaves resilient enough to regrow. Each interaction was both consumption and cultivation, a cycle that tied blossoms to beasts in ways neither could comprehend. High above, sauropods stretched their necks to treetops, stripping branches, shaking loose clusters of flowers that drifted down like pale rain. Their massive size made them architects of sunlight, opening canopies, allowing light to reach ground-level blooms. Coprolite studies show angiosperm fragments in their diets, proof that even the largest of herbivores sampled the new plants. Every seed that survived the slow journey through a sauropod's gut became a traveler, carried across valleys and rivers, planted in soils enriched by the animal's passage. In this way, giants unintentionally sowed the earth with the next generation of flowers, turning their migrations into acts of dispersal. The theropods, the predators, were not immune to the influence either. While many lived by tooth and claw, smaller species, some feathered and agile, appear to have sampled fruits when the opportunity arose. Tooth-wear patterns, fossilized stomach contents, and the evolutionary bridge toward birds suggest omnivory. To imagine a sleek, bird-like dinosaur plucking at berries is to see the continuity leading to modern nectar feeders and fruit eaters. Even carnivores felt the subtle pull of blossoms, taking calories from petals and seeds, linking themselves to flowers in ways beyond the hunt. Scientists trace these connections in fossil pollen layers, finding surges in angiosperm abundance that coincide with the rise of specialized herbivores. It is not a simple cause and effect, but the feedback loop is clear. Flowers spread, dinosaurs adapted, dinosaurs spread flowers further still. The planet itself seemed to conspire with them, continental drift carving new lands, climates warming into greenhouse worlds, rains nourishing fertile valleys. Dinosaurs and flowers were co-authors of this era. Their partnership not written in contracts, but in footsteps and petals. Imagine walking behind these herds, the ground trembling beneath their weight. You see blossoms at your feet, small but persistent, their colors muted under the heavy sun. A hadrosaur lowers its head, munching steadily, seeds slipping unnoticed into its throat. A ceratopsian tramples through shrubs, scattering petals. A sauropod passes overhead, its tail sweeping, its neck bending toward trees heavy with blooms. The air is thick with scents resin from conifers, the faint sweetness of flowers, the musk of animals. Insects hum round blossoms, carrying pollen, while dinosaurs carry seeds in their guts. Every creature is part of the cycle, from the smallest beetle to the largest sauropod. The rhythm is slow but immense, measured not in seasons but in ages. There is something humbling in imagining these giants softened by flowers. We think of dinosaurs as power incarnate, roaring, hunting, striding across barren plains. But here they are gardeners without knowing it, partners to blossoms that reshaped their diets, their habitats, their very survival. The ferocity of teeth and claws did not erase the quiet persistence of petals. Instead, the two existed together, strength and softness woven into the same tapestry. Flowers made no sound, but their presence was loud in consequences, guiding the future long after the last dinosaur fell silent. And in that image lies a kind of comfort. Even the most formidable creatures lived within worlds shaped by delicacy. Even thunderous footsteps echoed across meadows seeded with blossoms. The story of dinosaurs and flowers is not one of domination, but of coexistence, a reminder that life's greatest transformations are often quiet, unfolding beneath the notice of those who live them. It is only in hindsight, in fossils and pollen grains, that we see the depth of the partnership. And as we rest with this thought, we can let its rhythm slow our breathing, steady our minds, and remind us that beauty and power have always shared the same ground. As the Cretaceous advanced, the landscapes themselves seemed to change tone, as if painted with softer brushes. Where once cycads and conifers had dominated in endless monotony, angiosperms created mosaics of variety. Broad leaves unfurled toward the sun, blossoms opened in quiet color, fruits swelled with sugars that carried promise to any animal willing to taste. Dinosaurs were not immune to these shifts. They were surrounded by them, immersed in them, and ultimately shaped by them. The fossil record whispers this story not only in bones, but in pollen lodged in sediments, in seeds preserved in dung, in wear patterns etched into ancient teeth. Each fragment adds weight to the vision of giants and blossoms entwined. Hadrosaurs, with their elaborate crests and resonant calls, are among the clearest actors in this floral stage. Studies suggest their dental batteries were uniquely suited for processing angiosperm vegetation. They did not merely graze indiscriminately. They could grind fibrous leaves and chew softer flowering plants alike, thriving on diversity. Picture a herd moving through a lowland forest, their voices echoing across the canopy, their beaks cropping. Clusters of flowers, their young nibbling at tender shoots. Seeds pass through them, unharmed, falling far from their source, planting the ground for future meadows. The hadrosaur's appetite became a tool of dispersal, turning feeding into partnership, shaping the very geography of floral expansion. Ceratopsians, with their horned faces and armored frills, may have seemed fierce, but their role in floral evolution was no less vital. The strength of their beaks allowed them to shear through angiosperm shrubs, clearing paths that light could reach. Where they moved, flowers followed, colonizing the disturbed soils. Imagine a riverbank after a herd has passed, branches stripped, stems crushed, sunlight streaming into gaps. Within weeks, new shoots appear, seeds sprout, petals return. What looked like destruction was, in truth, cultivation, the rhythm of disturbance and renewal that plants have long relied upon. Flowers had found in ceratopsians, not adversaries, but unwitting allies, their passage creating room for diversity to flourish. The sauropods, ever the titans, carried their influence on an even grander scale. Their migrations stretched across continents, their immense bodies reshaping forests wherever they wandered. Angiosperm seeds traveling in their guts could be carried dozens of miles before being deposited in fertile soil. Coprolite studies from India and South America confirm fragments of angiosperms, suggesting that sauropods sampled them regularly. The thought is humbling. Each giant step could scatter life in ways unseen, turning the belly of a sauropod into a vessel of botanical exploration. The Earth's greatest herbivores were not just eaters, but dispersers, gardeners of vast ranges, their size a tool of floral conquest. Even predators, though their diets leaned toward flesh, were touched by the spread of flowers. Small theropods and early birds likely consumed berries and fruits, their sharp eyes catching glints of color among leaves. Fossil evidence of gastrolith stones, swallowed to aid digestions, sometimes include plant remains, hinting at omnivory. Picture a feathered raptor pausing at the edge of a thicket, snatching a berry between hunts, swallowing a seed that will later find soil far away. The line between predator and pollinator blurs, the dance of survival entangling even those who lived by claw and tooth. Darwin's words echo here, his frustration with the abominable mystery of flowering plants' rapid rise. Perhaps the mystery is less abominable when seen through the lens of dinosaurs. With their massive numbers, their migrations, their diets, they were accelerants, scattering seeds and shaping ecosystems on scales no insect alone could manage. Flowers offered food, dinosaurs offered movement. Together, they created a feedback loop that propelled angiosperms to dominance in less than 50 million years. A blink of an eye in geologic time. Imagine twilight falling over a Cretaceous plain. Hadrosaurs graze in the fading light, their silhouettes framed by the orange sky. Ceratopsians move in the distance, their frills catching the last rays like shields of fire. A sauropod lumbers past, brushing against flowering trees, petals falling in showers around its massive feet. Insects hum more faintly now, retreating into shadows, while the blossoms close with the night. It is a scene both immense and delicate, thunderous bodies moving through worlds of fragile blooms. Each step, each bite, each scattering of seeds writes the story deeper into Earth's memory. There is tenderness in realizing that even the most fearsome creatures lived amid blossoms. Strength and softness were not opposites, but partners, woven together across time. Dinosaurs did not conquer flowers, nor did flowers conquer dinosaurs. They lived in parallel, their lives entangled, their fates ultimately linked. When the great extinction came, wiping dinosaurs from the earth, flowers endured, carrying with them echoes of the giants who once wandered among them, every petal. Today is a survivor of that bond, a reminder of coexistence older than memory. As you rest with this thought, let the image linger. The ground trembling with footsteps, the air heavy with scent, petals brushing against scales, seeds riding within bodies across continents. It is a lullaby of strength softened by beauty, of giants unknowingly nurturing delicacy, of flowers turning thunder into continuity. In the silence of the night, you can almost hear it still. The low calls of hadrosaurs, the rustle of ceratopsian herds, the distant crack of branches under sauropod weight, all woven with the faint, persistent presence of blossoms. They lived together once, and in a way, through fossils and memory, they live together still. The Cretaceous Earth breathed differently than the world you know. The air itself was thicker with carbon dioxide, a greenhouse haze that wrapped the planet in warmth. There were no permanent ice caps at the poles, no vast glaciers grinding valleys. Instead, forests stretched almost to the high latitudes, their canopies lit by summer suns that never fully set, their trunks enduring winters of endless twilight. The atmosphere was not just a background, but a shaper of life, an unseen stagehand moving props and setting lights. Flowers spread not only because of their own invention, but because the air and climate gave them room, giving them seasons long and fertile. Storms rich in rain, skies heavy with possibility. Imagine standing in the middle of the Cretaceous greenhouse world. The air is warmer, heavier, humid in ways that press against your skin. Monsoons sweep across continents, their rains feeding inland seas, their thunder echoing in valleys where dinosaurs graze. Winds carve patterns in the clouds, carrying scents of resin and blossom, mixing with the salt of shallow oceans that once lay far inland. In this world, where there was not mild background, it was constant drama, shaping which plants could thrive, which animals could follow, and how ecosystems ebbed and flowed. Scientists studying ancient soils and isotopes in fossil shells tell us that carbon dioxide levels were several times higher than today, enough to keep the planet in a long, warm embrace. Temperatures near the equator were hot but survivable, supporting tropical forests rich with flowering plants. At the poles, despite months of darkness, deciduous trees grew in dense groves, their rings recording both long days and long nights. Fossilized wood from Alaska and Antarctica shows this resilience. Trees adapted to endure cycles of sun and shadow, shedding leaves in the dark months, budding again when light returned. Flowers, too, learned this rhythm, timing their blooms too. Fleeting summers, storing energy to endure the slow drift of seasons.